Don, would you call the roll?
Morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Representative Kinner.
Here.
Representative Larson.
Here.
Representative Schwartz.
Here.
Representative Simpson.
Here.
Representative Stiff.
Here.
Representative Walters.
Here.
Senator Garou.
Here.
Senator Hicks. Senator Steinmetz.
Excuse.
Senator Perkins.
Excuse.
Co-Chairman Nicholas. Chairman Kinski.
Here.
Mr. Chairman, you have a quorum.
So Drew finished his mediation, just to give everybody a little bit of news, and he thinks he'll be here 9 or 10. So we look forward to that. Don, do you have any housekeeping for us before we start in on the Wyoming Business Council?
Mr. Chairman, I do not.
Okay, so members of the committee, in addition to your budget for the Wyoming Business Council, Josh is also going to touch upon, come on up, Josh. He's also going to touch upon priorities 10 and 12 in the governor's ARPA request. And I'm not sure exactly which ones are 10 and 12, but you'll want to have the governor's ARPA request open as well as the business council budget. So good morning, Josh and crew. The floor is yours.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Thank you for having us. Can you hear me okay? Okay. My name is Josh Durrell. I'm the CEO of the Wyoming Business Council. We're looking forward to today's discussion about our budget and how we can work to develop Wyoming's economy and build some resilience in it. With me today, I have Amy Grenfell, our Chief Operating Officer, with me at the table. And then also joining us, we have Sarah Fitzgerald, who's our Chief Strategy Officer. Hava Case, who leads our human and team performance. You can think of human resources there. And Lindsay Orr, our Accounting Manager. Ron Goldberg, our Strategic Partners Director. And our newly appointed Investments Director, Bert Adam, who is coming from our entrepreneurship area. And so if there are any questions around that, he'll be here to talk with you. He's still moving from his entrepreneurship role so much so that he's still wearing tennis shoes, and that's a function of wanting to be like his audience, I suppose. So thank you for having us all here and to talk through those areas. Would you like me to begin with the state of the agency, sir?
Please, and then let's launch into the exception request because there's quite a bit there that we want to be able to hear about, but please
Absolutely.
Go ahead.
Absolutely. So if you could turn to page 4, that's where our little dialogue about the state of our agency starts. But I think more than anything, I wanted to alert the committee today to a few themes that we feel are important from the Business Council. So I took on this role in 2020, and obviously it's been a pretty interesting ride since then. I think we've all worked together to do a lot of things in the last 2 years, and they've been challenging, but also pretty exciting. And those have really set forth a lot of the things that we feel are important in our agency as to signaling change and also in the way that we work. And so I want to just talk about a few themes and realize and help you realize we are ready to and willing to rise to the challenge that our economy is bringing us right now. And I think over the last few years with the business relief programs, as well as our work on the strike team with the governor on Survive, Drive, and Thrive, we're showing that not only do we want to step up to do that, but we want to really work with other agencies and be a team, and that one Wyoming feel is important to us. Our budget request today represents really our problem-solving approach and the way we focus in on what is the particular challenge that we're looking to solve and define that really well, and then look at ways that we can solve that. And you'll notice that our budget centers around people, programs, and what we call funding growth and resilience in our communities. And to do this, we know that the communication is a really big key. So you'll notice some areas of communication there. And that our team must grow in order to rise to this challenge. And I think it's also important to note that our programs will need to adapt, and the things that we do will need to continue to change over the next few years. And this budget will allow us to go into that direction. I think that you'll also see some ways that we're looking to increase efficiency. We're actually a pretty small team when it comes right down to it. We have 36 positions at the Business Council. And so we utilize technology as much as possible to increase that efficiency. And we utilize partnerships as well to do that. The work that we did in 2020, and I think people remember that work a lot. In 2021, we started to really utilize the lessons that we learned in 2020 as we deployed the CARES Act funding to support businesses. And we began to look at the processes and the people that we have within our organization and really try to restructure the way we look and the way we work so that we could continue to have a relatively small team, but do big tasks. And so in 2021, we worked on foundational projects all around our investments team, our services team, and really to make it easier for people to utilize our programs and easier for us to administer them. Because again, we see the landscape changing rapidly, and we want our organization to be able to do that and not just do the same things as we've done in the past. And I think, again, you'll see that in our ask. But probably what I'm most proud of, and this might sound a little bit odd, but what I'm most proud of are the things that we've said no to in the last 2 years. And what I mean by that is in 20 and 21, the Business Ready Communities program, our board saw $41 million worth of requests for that program. And starting in March of 2020, we began to scrutinize those projects, maybe with a little bit higher level of scrutiny, obviously driven by the budget that we had, but also driven by making sure that we're making the impact in terms of jobs, good jobs and wages in our communities, because we feel that that's a really strong way to make a difference. And so we saw $41 million worth of requests, but we only funded $20 million of that. Now, let me compare that to the 2 years prior to that, in 18 and 19, we funded 100% of the requests that came before us. So what that tells our communities and what that tells our state is that we are good stewards of the money, that we're looking hard at the investments that we make, and we are really narrowly focused in on creating good jobs in our communities. I think it's also important to note that in 20 and 21, $7 million of that 20 million were in the form of loans. And so again, that's a dramatic increase also. So about 35% of that money that we put out there is in the form of loans, which is a good thing. And I think we heard loud and clear over the last few years that we want to make sure that we're, one, making great investments, that we're building resilience in our communities, but we're also doing it in a way that could be somewhat sustainable in those funds. And I think that you'll see that change reflected in that. And so while we did many other things during the last 2 years, I think that's what we're most proud of. And our team has really rallied around that and worked hard to evaluate those projects and make sure that we're making great decisions for the state. If we could, just before we get into the exception requests, sir, if we could turn your attention to page 9 of the budget and talk a little bit about that whole idea of metrics and opportunities. And this is really one of our big elements that we look at, and the metric that we use most, especially as we look at projects and as we look at the success that we can have within the state. So we are really set up to create opportunities for Wyomingites. And I think it goes back to the whole idea that if you talk to someone on the street about a community member about what is important to them, they're obviously going to say a lot of the things that Wyoming is great about. But one of the things that probably keeps people up at night more than anything is whether they'll have opportunities for growth in their career, whether they'll have opportunities if something bad happens in their career, and whether they'll be able to stay in the community that they love. And so we take that to heart, and we focus a lot of effort on developing those opportunities for our communities. And we look at those in terms of the jobs that we create and the wages that are paid for those jobs. because we feel like having good jobs and having flexibility and mobility in your career is an important way to build resilience in your community. So we look at that and we focus in on that. And again, over the last couple of years, we have really focused in on creating good jobs, not just jobs, but good ones. And so if you take a look at the last 5 years on average, we create about 145 new jobs per year. And in the last 5 years, that average is about $20 an hour. Well, in our mind, that's not the type of jobs that we want to create, because we want to create those jobs that are good. And so we've worked hard to increase that wage. And so over the last 2 years, from the projects that we're funding, the projections are to create 141 jobs, so slightly fewer jobs per year, but at $33 an hour. So again, a really big increase. I think that's 65%, if my math is correct, increase in the wages that those jobs will represent. And again, our goal is to create those good jobs so that there is resilience, because we know we're going to face ups and downs. We know that industries are going to rise and fall, and we want to be able to build that resilience in. And so that's an area that, again, I think if you look at the things that are important to us and what we're able to accomplish, those are dramatic markers in what we're able to do. And again, our budget reflects how do we do more of that.
Mr.
So-
Chairman,
Senator Hicks.
if I can ask a real quick question, Josh, that comes to mind, and I appreciate the fact that you're looking a lot more at the loan component, but what kind of interest rates and terms are you given on those loans?
Mr. Chairman?
Please.
Senator Hicks, so we have, so by statute, we have low interest rates, and so we have to do that. We could probably get the exact number. Ms. Grenfell can provide that. But I want to let you know that our goal is to have low interest rates, and those are governed by the statutes that we have for BRC and our loan programs. So I think they're down in the, there has to be an interest component, but it is very low, probably 1% to 2%.
All right, thank you.
Josh, is that loan repayment part of the recapture of these projects then too?
Mr. Chairman, yes, sir. So that loan repayment goes back into the BRC fund so that it can be used again. And the recapture component of any investment that we make in a community in the infrastructure, any chance that we can recapture that money, that also goes back into the BRC fund.
Thank you. Please continue.
Thank you. So thank you for the questions. And if you could turn to page 10, I won't spend a lot of time on our standard budget, because as Mr. Chairman has mentioned, the exception requests are the much more exciting part of this budget. But I will again tell you that we're looking at people, programs, and funding that resilience, and you'll see that in our standard budget. One thing to note about our agency, that budget, the ask that we have, really a big portion of that is for money that we put out in terms of grants and loans, and so that we can develop the infrastructure within the communities that we work in. In terms of our people and our programs, that's actually a smaller part of the budget that we have. We could, I guess more than anything, we could turn to page, I believe it is 17, and you'll note that the governor has recommended our standard budget be approved as it is written. And so, to please the chair, we'll jump to page 19 to take a detailed view of our exception requests and spend a little time there. Again, we want to look at people, we want to look at programs, and we want to look at how do we fund the growth and resilience in our communities and industries in Wyoming. And those are the themes that I think you'll notice. But I also think there's another theme here that you probably have noticed as you look at these exception requests. We're doing our best to think big and bold in the coming years so that we can make as big an impact as possible. The first, Mr. Chairman, would you like me to go through each individual exception request and spend some time on each of those? Would that be the best thing to do? Yes, sir. And you'll see that represented in the priority that we have placed those. So I'll do my best to move through them. The first positions that we're asking for are in terms of people. And priority one is for a business retention and expansion professionals. Two of them, in fact, is in our budget request. I thought that I might just do a quick recap of what that is. You might say that we're all in business retention and expansion, right? We're all about growing the businesses that are here in Wyoming and helping them stay solvent and stay capable of approaching new markets and continuing to be sustainable into the future. However, when you're all in that, sometimes you're not really focused in on it as much as possible. You do what you can do, but ultimately we need professionals who focus on that every day. We have companies in markets that are growing. We have companies in markets that are shrinking, and we have companies that are kind of cruising along. And we want them all to be taken care of and understand what their needs are so that we can bring that back in terms of policy and programs and spend funds to keep them moving forward. Just to give you some perspective, the state of Idaho, which is their economy is a little different than ours in that they have I think more knowledge sector and a little bit more resilient, but their team has 5 individuals focused on business retention and expansion. And so it's really important for us to step up to the plate and make sure that the businesses in Wyoming have some support and have some understanding within our walls.
Please, Representative.
So Director Durrell, so with that, so Idaho has 5. We currently have, that's my question. How many do we currently have? Then this would add 1, I believe.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, we currently have 0 that are focused on. Thank you. So we've asked for 2. You'll see in the governor's recommendation that he is recommending 1 of these positions be filled. All right, if you could, at the bottom of
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Go ahead.
So then does this tie in as we look at development in the state, and I'm looking at this nuclear demonstration project in Lincoln County. I'm looking at the potential of hydrogen hubs. I'm looking at carbon capture potential up in the northern state. I'm looking at F.E. Warren Air Force Base, right? So then the question that we have as legislators are how will these projects most benefit Wyoming businesses and Wyoming employers and Wyoming employees? And currently, how are we trying to coordinate those efforts that are moving fairly quickly to ensure that our resources, that we benefit from these opportunities and that we don't see all of the construction, the labor associated with implementation coming from our states or even further out? So how are we doing that now?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, that's a great question. And so, you know, we're doing our best to be nimble. And so we have a team of folks who are quite flexible. They understand economic development and they can play those roles. And so the way we've addressed that in the short run is that we have adjusted some of the positions that we have today in order to meet that need. Like you are saying, we see that as an urgent but also important component of economic development. And so some of the things that maybe we've done in the past, maybe as you know, as recent as a couple of years ago, we are not doing today because we just simply cannot do it. So this position and then the next ones that I'll talk about will aid in that and will allow us to do more. But you're right, you just rattled off 4 or 5 really big projects that are coming at us. And if our businesses aren't ready to take advantage of those, we're in a little bit of trouble. So we have worked on over the course of this year, especially in the nuclear realm, we've worked on, we've devoted one of our team members to doing just that coordination of the existing businesses in Wyoming and understanding how might they address the TerraPower and Rocky Mountain Power situation and take full advantage of that. And so that takes a lot of coordination. And again, within our exception request, you can see that the people are at the top of that, because with people, even without a ton of budget, that can be somewhat accomplished. Now, if you can have people, they have a budget to do their work, and then they have the ability to perhaps spur on some of that development with the money that we're asking for funding growth, I think you have what you need to truly accomplish it. Hopefully that answers your question.
Mr. Chairman, simply a house cleaning item on the bottom of page 19. Says I recommend a partial approval of 280,500. And it goes further to say I recommend denial of 280,000. That should be 280,500. Then the math is correct. And the same thing is on the next accept request on page 20.
Thank you. I think our staff already caught it and corrected it for you. As a courtesy.
Just trying to
Josh,
get out
I've got
in front of
a
this
quick
night.
question. As this F.E. Warren expansion was coming on, there were companies in Sheridan and Casper that wanted to be a part of that. And we had a conversation with the Business Council about retaining somebody with expertise that would help show them how do you market to defense companies. And then before that, you had to have certain certifications. Is that what these positions would, that sort of work these positions would do?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. That is some of the work that this position and the next one, it provides a good segue, I think, into
Okay.
that,
Thank
into
you.
the next section as well. So at the bottom of page 19, we introduce this next position or positions that we're asking for. And then on page 20, you'll see that we provide more information about that particular role. And that is industry and market development expertise. And so as Chairman Kinski was mentioning, there are these opportunities where you need some expertise in an industry. You need to be focused on within these industries and make sure that our policies make sense, our programs make sense, certifications, and the way that you market. And that also leads into our next request, but the way you market our companies or recruit to the state needs to be somewhat industry specific. And that's what this next request is for two individuals to provide that industry and market development expertise.
Please.
So Director Durrell, I think I'm kind of following up on Chairman Kinski's question to you. But for example, we could see many of the things that I mentioned earlier, we could see these taking place simultaneously. And so the concern then is then what is our market capacity? And then if we're going to have to do something regionally, how do we benefit from that? Can we work in conjunction with other states to where we still benefit rather than just having it come in? And then even a more specific question is when we visited with the nuclear demonstration project, there's some DOE funds that are affiliated with that are really lent to utilize union-based labor. But we're in a right to work state. We're not opposed to unions, but we're not requiring unions. And so that contractor that will be doing that in a recent conversation indicated that really will imply that will really be a focus. And it's the same contractor that will be doing F.E. Warren. But they feel that there's a real pressure to use union labor here. And so then when we talk about you using Wyoming manufacturers, Wyoming contractors, they may or may not be. And so would this individual be able to intervene early to ensure that this federal requirement doesn't impede our ability based on state law to exempt or to disqualify Wyoming employers from participating in and benefiting from these projects?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, you bring up a really good point. And again, I think it's kind of wrapped up. We're today, a couple years ago, our team was structured in a certain way. And today we're morphing into what we need to be for the future. But with resourcing, it's challenging to do that many things and wear that many hats, to dig into the level that are important. And I think that's a really key component about these positions, is that they will need to be focused in, working hard, and focused solely on those issues that you're talking about right there. And I think that's a common thing. When you get to the spot where you're really, really lean, you cannot focus in on the factors that are most important in certain industries. And I think what you're talking about is why we believe that people power is really critical. To have someone who understands all of those issues and can focus solely on that particular element of the industry or of these contracts is critical, because they've got to be able to understand it and then communicate it back to us and you to say, this is what we need. So yes, thank you. So again, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I believe that summarizes those two asks pretty well in terms of the positions and what we're asking for. Again, you'll notice, as Director Hibbard said, the governor's recommendation was to approve one of those two positions. We definitely have plenty of work to do there. So, but you'll see that has been recommended for one position there. Also at the bottom of page 20, we're talking about an additional resource for recruiting efforts. And I want to make sure that everyone knows that is for business recruiting efforts. We have our own personnel recruiting efforts taken care of just fine. However, we do feel like for business recruiting, we want to beef that up. And that's an area, if you turn to page 21, that's an area for us where we have one individual who is doing business recruiting right now. And she's very accomplished. She's great at coordinating with communities and helping businesses see the benefits of Wyoming, as well as attending shows in industries that we are focused on. However, she's one person. And we know that it's going to take more to do that, to do more outbound. And when we talk about doing outbound, outbound recruiting, if we're focused in on those industries and those areas that we know are coming forth, as Representative Larson mentioned, those areas we can really target and look at the specifics of the companies and organize that. But again, people power is important there. Now, you'll also notice that this could potentially utilize ARPA funds to fund it for maybe a short term, to understand what we could do, or to sort of hire a hired gun, if you will, and have them go out and make some strides in certain industries. I believe that that's possible. I believe that it could be done. It is not part of the current ARPA proposal to survive, drive, and thrive. So I just want to make sure that while on one hand, yes, ARPA funds could be utilized to hire a contractor to do that, it's not currently in the proposal. But we do feel like it's really important. And as we've talked with others throughout the industries as well as the legislature, that is an area that comes up a lot, is recruiting. Again, to continue to maybe utilize the example of Idaho, they have 4 individuals that are focused only on recruiting efforts.
And so then I'll ask this question for Representative Larson. We have one, is that right? Okay.
Mr. Chairman, correct.
Thank you.
That is correct. We have one today. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so at the bottom of page 21, so staying on that same page in the exception.
So Josh.
Yes, sir.
Co-chair.
Please, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Co-chair.
So Leeds and I think Casper, they have dedicated individuals, at least part-time, that perform that function, right? So it's happening. And the question is, are they better adept at doing it for those locales than you? How do you cross-pollinate to make it work?
Mr. Chairman, Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. That's a great question. And I do believe we have a lot of capabilities at many of our economic development organizations and towns in order to do recruiting. I think you mentioned a couple of them. We have folks in really all corners of the state that are pretty darn good at recruiting. And sometimes they have a full-time person doing that. And sometimes that's just a function of many of their people. And so we work and coordinate through the organizations that are around, for example, WIDA, but we also work closely with the organizations that you've mentioned. I have a call every couple of weeks with both of the ones that you mentioned, and we stay in pretty close contact about the recruiting efforts, because you're right. We can't recruit for a locale as well as an economic development organization can. They know their businesses better. They know their space better. They're really good at showing off their communities. However, we would like to be able to help with bringing those opportunities just to Wyoming, so that then those locales can show off what they do best. But you're absolutely right. I think close coordination with the economic development organizations in the state is really important. So thank you.
So Director Durrell, maybe to follow up and try to better understand Chairman Nicholas's observation and your point, as we look, for example, and I'll just use knowns that we have with this nuclear project, we understand that there will be a certain amount of manufacturing that will be required for that project. And so then my question is who do we have in the statewide that could benefit from that? Who in the nation traditionally does that? And how do we coordinate those known people to either come to Wyoming or use a Wyoming asset to meet their needs? And so my understanding that that's more in line with what this individual would do, rather than to, am I getting that right, or am I missing a component? It's beyond a local, it's a statewide.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman and Representative Larson, that's correct. It is a statewide, and that coordination that you talk about, and that, communication within the locals, so that everybody understands what we're going after and what we're able to accomplish, I think is really critical. And again, that takes concerted effort. It takes that, full-time focus. So yes, sir. I believe that's what we're saying.
Anything else? Representative, please continue.
So the next piece is also at the bottom of page 21, and that's a role around community development. And that's really about building capacity within our communities. We have one person, we have 6 regional directors, but we also have that do this function in some regard. But we also have one role today that is focused on community development and capacity building. And I think, to continue to utilize the Kimmer example of the Natrium plant and what that's going to do, the level of construction in the coming years, and it might be 4 or 5 years down the road, really, as permitting and all of that stuff takes some time. But if you think about the load that's going to be on these areas of our state and these communities within our state, it's really pretty dramatic what's going to occur in the next few years. And one of our folks jokes around, it will be impossible to get a Caesar salad in Rock Springs. And I think that we're kind of hoping that that's the case, right? That we create that. But at the same time, we don't want to be behind the 8 ball. And all Caesar salad jokes aside, I think it's something very serious that we need to make sure that our communities are ready in these areas. And so building that capacity is something that this role would accomplish, in addition to the other capacity building roles that we have, such as Main Street management and also our current community development personnel. So that's another area that is really important to us. And so I think that that's something to consider as you look at our budget.
So Josh, I had a regional rep that did that for us, that helped tutor us and lead us through the process and help direct our efforts and made it clear, you know, we had to do the work for ourselves, but they could help us with that process. He's since retired, but how does this differ from what your regional folks do?
Mr. Chairman, it doesn't necessarily differ from what our regional directors do today. However, I think with the example of Kimmer is one, but Representative Larson laid out quite a few with hydrogen hubs and CCUS and some of the big projects that are coming our way. We've got to have our communities ready. So it's really in addition to. Also, I want to talk a little bit about reorganizing our team to better address some of the things that are coming toward us. And so we know that there is a lot of federal money coming at us right now. And so in order to make sure that we take full advantage of all of that federal money, we're going to have to, you know, be grant experts and coordinate grant efforts with other agencies in the state. And our regional directors, because they understand their regions, they understand their strengths within those regions, they can play an important role. And so we're also moving folks in the direction of those federal funding opportunities and how do we coordinate with agencies like the Energy Authority and Workforce so that we can come up with the best proposals. And those folks have also been able to do that. Yeah. Okay, so I want to just make sure that those personnel challenges are understood and make sure that you realize where we're going with the agency and how we can utilize those personnel the best. And then I want to step into the next exception request, which deals with our compensation market adjustments. And so that is an element of our exception request that back in September, when the budget was submitted, we looked at the positions that we had and the pay for those positions, as well as the classifications of those positions and the roles that our team was performing. And so we put together an analysis that showed how the positions needed to be compensated so that they were appropriately compensated for maybe not today's standards, but a standard that we had at the 2020 pay tables. And then we also looked at those levels of the positions and the roles that they played to recategorize. So we came up with a number of about $764,832 that would enable us to appropriately compensate our team, as well as reclassify those folks that maybe at one point come in as a grant administrator, for example, but now they were doing much more expertise-based work. And that's the number we arrived at. Now, since that time, many things have happened. The enterprise as a whole is looking at a compensation adjustment. So we do this always, but especially in cases like this, we worked closely with the folks at A&I and the state budget office to really make sure that we aligned 100% with their methodology and their calculations for our agency. And so the number that would match us up with the rest of the enterprises ask for compensation adjustments is $361,463. And again, that number matches up exactly with the state budget department and the A&I calculations.
Kevin, can you help us set?
Yes,
Why
Mr.
were they not part of the pay performance plan from the get-go? And
Mr. Chairman, there are several agencies out there that operate out of 900 series with no
Okay.
positions. Tourism is another example. So this was not picked up as a position classification in the back book that we provided to you. But we have worked with the Business Council and using the same methodology of calculation that we used for the remainder of the enterprise, University of Wyoming Community Colleges, Business Council, Public Television, Energy Authority. That number would be $361,544.
544,
361,544.
okay. And so then why was that not put into this budget the way it was on all the other?
Mr. Chairman, there are some places in the budget, community colleges, University of Wyoming, and this Business Council, where they actually did ask for the market adjustments. The remainder of the budgets do not have that because the agencies were advised that there'd be an enterprise solution. So this was just a request on the agency in this budget center. And when we got to it, we just advised them that we would address this as an enterprise solution, the same way that we did with the community colleges at the University of Wyoming.
Please, Representative Stith and then Representative Schwartz.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Durrell, thank you. So just so I understand it, so on page 23 of the budget, it asks for $764,000. Are you now saying instead of that number, what you're actually asking for is the 361,544, or am I misunderstood? Or do you want 764 plus 361?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Stith, great question. While we would love to have 764, we're saying to align with the rest of the enterprise, the 361,000 odd number is what we're asking for. Now, one thing that I do want to make sure is that doesn't like accidentally get deleted out of both budgets, from the state budget office or ours, and then it's not there. So if we can make sure that that bookkeeping takes place. We'll be happy.
Kevin and then Representative Schwartz.
Mr. Chairman, we would ask that you don't approve any salary adjustments for the enterprise in a specific agency budget. The governor will be delivering to you a letter. In that letter, the enterprise is in consideration, including a phrase to allow special revenue agencies to be able to fall in line with the compensation package as selected. So the enterprise number that will be presented to you Friday will include the business council and those other agencies.
And follow up on that, the
Yeah,
source of
please.
those funds are going to be what? Is it going to vary between agencies? Or?
Mr. Chairman, so the governor will be requesting the general fund portion. And then he'll be requesting that the agencies with special revenue be allowed to come along in the same policy with their own money. And then they'll also approve that. So that the special revenue agency would say, yes, we want to go along with the same policy. And then that would be the sideboards for the special revenue. We haven't gone through the overall calculation for all the special revenues, but we have done those agencies with the general fund, and that's the appropriation the governor will be seeking with a note that special revenue agencies can fall in line.
So Kevin, we can expect an upward revision on that. I think it was a $53 million per year figure for the initial pay performance plan.
Mr. Chairman, correct. I believe the governor's letter will be asking for approximately 54 million, but the statistic that I have now is $53,986,876.
Okay, thank you. Representative Schwartz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think Kevin answered this, but there's a number of these requests, including this one, where the suggestion was it would be ARPA funding, which is one-time funding for an ongoing situation. It was true previously with some of the positions. And I'm assuming that it's kind of a hope situation.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to field that first. The original governor's instructions for the budgets said, let's build a budget without consideration for CARES and ARPA. Because if we were trying to do all this at once, it would be very difficult. So we requested that the agencies act like there are no ARPA funds. The Business Council has included several requests that may be ARPA. And in fact, some of these requests, the governor has in his proposal, and the director has that list, and he will reflect that for you when he gets to a proposal that is in the governor's proposal. But some of these that we've already discussed, nationally, the compensation, that's going to be the enterprise solution, and the prior to, they wouldn't qualify for ARPA.
Okay, follow on, Representative Schwartz. Okay, please continue, Mr. Durrell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. All good questions. So yeah, I think moving on to page, let's see, 20, at the bottom of 23, you will notice a request for programs and service performance management. It's a little bit cryptic, but ultimately what that is that is a technology contractor to help us utilize our program that manages all of the contacts that we have, as well as the performance of our programs. It's called salesforce.com. It's a system that we've been using for a number of years, and it's a system that we utilized heavily in the business relief programs. we see that as a way to utilize technology to make sure that we're not just continuing to add staff to do that calculation, that can be handled by software and manage a lot of the data that we work with. I think it's important to note here that in this particular ask that we have reviewed this with ETS and Interim Director Sheehan. So he has seen that and is concurring that we do not currently support that software system and that that he understands that we would need to utilize an outside contractor to do those functions. Again, that's an ask that would really just enables us to be more efficient, and it enables us to communicate more easily about the program performance we have, as well as analyze the performance of our programs so that we can make changes to improve.
Okay. Please, Kevin.
To assist Representative Swartz, I'm going to use this as an example. There was a request for $250,000, and when we were doing the budget in the fall, we made the recommendation, the governor made the recommendations. I recommended denial of this exception request, and we'll consider the funding for ARPA funds. It was considered. The governor has proposals that he's delivered to you, and the director will clarify which one of those proposals in this book that the governor has, in fact, included in his proposals. So hopefully that helps.
Okay.
And so thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Director Hibbert. I think it is important to note that, again, that was not included. There are two exception requests that are part of our budget request that are part of the governor's proposal, and we'll get to those in a moment. They're priorities 10 and 12. So we'll talk about those, and I'm happy to talk about the specifics of those. Again, hopefully this doesn't confuse it, but add some clarity. Our goal with developing this budget was to say, these are the problems that we see out there, and these are the solutions that we propose, not knowing where the funding source might come from. Because again, a lot of things are in motion at the same time. And so we wanted to make sure that the problems were illuminated and that potential solutions were as well. As Director Hibbert mentioned, the proposal for the $250,000 for our Salesforce contractor to provide support that we need for that software system is not part of any ARPA proposals. You will also, on that same page 24, we talk about communication support. Again, we noticed in 2020 that communication was incredibly important to us, and being able to communicate with communities, with businesses is something that frankly, it takes money to do, and it takes resources to do. Within our step 2 budget reductions, we actually lost 3 positions in our communications function, and then utilized contractors to provide that function. And in some cases like that, contractors can be more efficient and effective, and we were able to utilize Wyoming firms to do that work. And so while it is sometimes great to have folks available to you at all the time, it's also nice to have a contractor on your team, because they can kind of keep track of what's happening and see things from another perspective, which can be very useful. And that's the request that we're making for communications expertise and help over the next couple of years. And so that's that $500,000. And again, that is not included in any ARPA proposal from the governor today. Moving on to page 25, I want to talk a little bit about the training, the training budget increase. Again, we're going to be asking our team to shift. We're going to be asking our people to pivot into new areas that maybe they haven't done in the past. And while we have a team of professionals that is willing to do that and is really able to learn on their feet and take it very seriously, we feel like training is an important component into helping our team really respond to the challenges. I think it's also important from a perspective of retention. One of the elements, obviously, in the compensation adjustment is to retain the talent that you have at an agency, and that enables us to do our work. I think that there's an element of that in compensation, but I think training is one of the other big motivators for our team. and having the resources available to them to be, to continue to improve in their career is something that we feel like matches up with our approach, but also is a powerful retention and continue to build the expertise within an agency. And so we see that that training increase as a way to do that.
So thank you. So you're number 8 of 16 priorities, and we have 8 minutes left. I won't ask that you do the remaining 8 in 1 minute each.
Nope.
But we'll give you some latitude past the hour, but I'd ask you if we could step it up, and particularly on these governor's ARPA requests, we're anxious to hear more.
Absolutely, Mr. Chairman. And thank you for keeping me on task here. There are a number of housekeeping items that are represented by the next few elements. So I think it's the next 4 elements are all really housekeeping items for bookkeeping purposes. And so those.
Do they all net to 0?
That's correct, sir.
Okay.
That's correct. So what I might do, since that was our unit 101, we'll just go ahead and jump to those elements that.
Please.
I just do, I have one question before we shift gears there. And Kevin, this is similar to the question I had yesterday on page 26, as we look at moving that remaining money over to the Energy Authority, that 582,000, I see it here in the Business Council budget, but I don't see an exception request in the Energy Authority.
Mr. Chairman, I'll validate that for you.
Thank you.
Okay.
So if we could, let's jump quickly to page 36. There are really 4 elements that I'd like to cover in the next few minutes. The first of which, on page 36, you'll see our request for continued SBIR match grant funding. So the Small Business Innovative Research grants provided by the federal government, we provide a match to those businesses that utilize those grants. And it's a powerful recruiting tool. It also creates some of the highest quality jobs and wages of any program. Now, that program was funded with endow funds, but those funds will be depleted by the end of this fiscal year. And so we're requesting that that money be replenished. And it is also not part of an ARPA request.
Okay, and so I'd ask as a follow-up, not now, if you might send us a list of some of the things that have come out of the SBIR. I know of some in Sheridan that have really created a lot of jobs.
Yes, sir. We'll be happy to do that for the elements that we're not able to cover today. Thank you. Now, there is on page 38, the first of our exception requests that, oh, I'm sorry. Well, I think that's okay. We're going to go ahead and skip that because we're going to go ahead and go to the governor's, the things that are in the governor's proposal to spend some time talking about those. So on page 38, you'll see that there is a request for $10 million for a targeted industry development. And this element is part of the governor's proposal to survive, drive, and thrive. It is in, there are two different elements to that. One is, and we can again provide you the particular names of those, but the details are essentially to make sure that what we are looking at doing in our economy are things that we can and should do, not just those things that we want to do. And so we are going to utilize studies from a group at Harvard to accomplish some of that. We're going to be able to do a set and develop a team within the governor's office and other agencies to approach those industries and attack those. And so that's where those come from. There are actually 2 requests in that. One is for 5 million, one is for 2 million in order to accomplish that particular that effort. So as it is, the targeted industry is being covered by the ARPA proposal and can be considered in that rather than in our budget.
So Don, I've got the governor's ARPA proposal over. I'm trying to see where this one crosswalks to it. Do you happen to know?
Mr. Chairman, I can.
Representative?
So I believe that first $5 million would be on the 3rd item down on, if you have this spreadsheet which is the investment thesis, gross diagnostics assist-based economic development. And then the other would maybe be the energy of the future one, I think was 2,500 or 2.5 million,
So,
Please.
Mr. Chairman and Representative Larson,
Or-
the other one.
or the
is-
special projects.
Special projects.
Special
yes, sir.
projects.
Yes, sir. Special projects.
Yep,
That's
thank you.
correct.
Okay, so that's on the governor's ARP. That's page 6. I've got it. Okay,
Yep, and those are revenue replacement ARPA funds, not strict ARPA funds.
So, Mr. Chairman,
please.
so I want to make sure I understand. You made a reference to a Harvard study, but I want to make sure if I've understood how that all come about. So I think if the way I understand it is your team was looking on how to readjust what it is you do in the business council. You come across some studies where Harvard, the Kennedy School of Business, I believe, is working with developing nations or nations who are redesigning their focus, their economic focus from traditional industries to new industries to meet the needs. And so you guys called them, called Harvard and said, do you do this for states? They had not or have not to date done it for states. They run it up the ladder and has come back and said, if we would entertain doing it for Wyoming. And if Wyoming elects to participate, that would be our number one priority in helping over the other. And so we have an opportunity here then to use some established expertise in designing and focusing on economic development from that school here through that program. Am I capturing that accurately?
Please.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, and yeah, thank you, Representative Larson. That does capture it accurately. We sent 5 individuals from various agencies, 2 from ours, to the leading economics growth course at Harvard over the course of from October through December, and worked closely with those individuals at Harvard to basically frame up the problem statement and determine that this is a challenge that they would like to approach. As you mentioned, they typically work with nation states, not individual states in our union. And but they see this as a big challenge, and they see it as something that could be very powerful. Yes.
And
Representative Stith.
Mr. Chairman, just to clarify, and so that's under, what I've got is on page 6, the special projects, the $2 million ask, is that, just so I'm tracking?
There,
Trying to figure out
Mr. Chairman,
the dollar figure
Representative
associated with
Stitt.
this. topic.
yes, there are 2 asks on page 6 there. There are the growth diagnostics as well as the special projects. So there's a one $5 million ask and one $2 million ask.
So, Mr. Co-Chair, how much specifically is the Harvard, and what's the breakdown of those costs? I mean, itemization of it, you can send it to us, but if it's simple, just tell us what it is.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Co-Chair, that I could send you the detailed breakdown. We have their proposal and have all of that, but ultimately is a 2-year engagement where they will provide and come to the state and provide workshops to understand what is happening at the state, also help us out with the macro trends that are going on. So it's a full analysis of our economy and our policies and regulatory environment that will allow basically allow us from a policy level all the way down to a local level to understand what's happening at our state. And so we could provide the exact scope of work. We'd be happy to do so. And I believe that detail is in the ARPA proposals, the further documentation of the ARPA.
Representative Larson.
But I think, Mr. Director Durrell, the answer to that question is $3 million.
Oh, sorry. Yes, sir. It's $3.5 million is the price tag there. Thank you for helping.
How much of that goes to fees, tuition, all that, whatever it is? I mean, how much does Harvard get out of Kennedy's business school? Is that all to them, or is it?
That particular element is all to them. And then the other $1.5 million is for us to accomplish the work and put our resources toward it.
And so did they provide an outline of the work and the personnel and the time and
Yes, sir.
endeavors?
Yes, sir. They did.
Mr. Chairman.
Please.
Josh, just if I said, based on the discussion that we've just had, it looks like this 10 million would fund maybe up to 3 different studies on different economic sectors within the state of Wyoming. So that's a confirmation that that's what we're kind of looking at, correct?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman and Senator Hicks, so this particular element of our proposal from back in September was developed based on those, right? The leading economic growth and that growth diagnostic will look at a much more broad perspective of that. So as we developed that relationship with Harvard and as we understood their scope of work, we were able to hone in and really have their analysis and the way that they look at this project. So at the time of this proposal for the exception request on this budget, this was our approach at that time. That has been supplanted by that growth diagnostic.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, then a follow-up. I'm curious as to this discussion that we had with the University of Wyoming. They've got an Office of Research and Business Development and stuff. Is what has been the nature of those discussions and why Harvard and why can't the University of Wyoming provide these same services? And if we were to stand up a $10 million program, do we lack the capacity in state to be able to do this with our university?
Mr.
Please.
Chairman and Senator Hicks, that's a great question. We actually work closely with the Center for Business and Economic Analysis, as well as the Office of Research and Economic Development. So we work closely with those folks. And one of the members of that, the Center for Business and Economic Analysis, attended the Leading Economic Growth course with us at Harvard because we felt like that there's definitely a close coordination there. However, in the experience that school has, as well as the work that they've done in developing nations around the world, we wanted to be able to leverage that, but at the same time, extend it into the universities.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, just one follow-up question. So that would lead me to say, okay, if this is at least right now, kind of let's get this program understood and up and implemented. I'm assuming that the Business Council would want to make this a programmatic type of thing as different industries and opportunities come up. So again, has there been a discussion with the University of Wyoming if we're going to go down this road to develop a long-term programmatic approach to this? Or you're going to be back in 2 years asking for another $2 million to deal with Harvard economic analysis and study. So there should be a logical direction that I think that we want to proceed here, but have those discussions taken place as to how do we build this internally instead of trying to continue to contract with out-of-state universities?
Mr. Chairman and Senator Hicks, the short answer is yes, absolutely. We want to develop that here and be able to run the show on our own.
All right, thank you.
Representative Larson.
And Director Durrell, I think it even comes back to Senator Hicks's point that for us is what is our policy? What is our energy policy? Because our policy then drives your policy. And so I think we're at this crossroads right now on how we move economically into the future with the opportunities at hand. We, in conjunction, and this could help identify what it is we need to do to put into policy. So I would just share that with the committee because I think we oftentimes throw this out there to our agencies and say, guide us through this storm when they don't have any policy to give them direction. And I think that we need to be considering what our part is in helping them develop that policy might be. Is that, do you see that differently, Director Durrell?
Mr. Chairman, the short
If you can
answer
answer
is,
that, please do.
well,
No, I'm
I
just
think,
kidding, Lloyd, just kidding.
I think the short answer is that I agree that we need to collaborate and that we're going to uncover policies and things that we'll need to work on it. So I don't necessarily think it's hey, go at it on your own or, hey, we don't have it. I think that what we're trying to do is exactly what you're saying. We need to work together on this. And this is hopefully will illuminate some of that and bring in some outside thinking. Thank you.
Before we leave that topic, I just want to double check. Your page 38 targeted industry development is the same as the governor's page 6 investment thesis and diagnostics.
And special projects. There are two elements. One is, sorry, sir.
Oh,
Mr.
okay.
Chair,
They're
this-
both there.
Yes.
Okay. Gotcha. All right, please continue.
Okay, in the interest of time, on any of the elements that we don't cover in our exception request, we'll be happy to provide some more data in a memo to the committee. But I think it might be appropriate to jump to page 44 or 46, excuse me. Yeah. So this final unit of our agency is around business-ready communities. And those are the funding mechanisms that we use to build infrastructure in communities and to develop that resilience. Again, it's not our agency that gets that money and then spends it, but it goes out into the communities to develop their economies. And so the governor's recommendation of that standard budget is at the bottom of page 46. And then moving to page 47 begins I would say, two of the most interesting exception requests we have. One is interesting because the item on page 47, priority number 10, to increase BRC for gap funding on current projects. That is covered by the ARPA request to survive, drive, and thrive. And I want to mention that is not a revenue replacement element. It is a purely ARPA request. So think COVID impacts, health and human services, that side of the house. That particular proposal is in that. And it is 10 million in the ARPA proposal. Again, we had our best estimates at the time and looking at what the costs might be. We have narrowed it down to the projects, and I believe that has been provided to Representative Larson and LSO. I think you've all seen the list also with the Survive, Drive, and Thrive of the individual projects that were caught in the middle. They were approved at a time when costs were X. But over the course of COVID, with the COVID impacts and inflation and elements like that, now they are much more like maybe 1.3, 1.5, 2X, maybe more. And so those projects are at risk of not being completed. And ultimately, that's an economic impact that cannot be seen until those projects are completed. So it is our goal to utilize those ARPA funds to finish those projects and make sure that the economic impact is felt.
So, Mr. Co-Chair,
Please.
Josh, if we don't do ARPA funds, and theoretically, you're going to have to use existing BRC dollars to just kind of complete those before you grant to new projects. Is that right?
Mr. Chairman, and Mr. Co-Chair, that is one avenue to do that, would be to not use those ARPA funds, but perhaps use BRC or.
Well, what besides those two, is there a third avenue?
Not for us. The other option would be to say no and see if they could go it alone, but we don't want that to happen.
Well, and what I can't tell by the report that was provided, and I presume you provided that to us, that's in the bank of documents justifying the request. You can't tell how far along these projects are. If they're actually, if the ground is broken, if they've got, if they've got footings in, we can't tell by reading the descriptions of it. So I think that would be useful to know. And the other thing is the vast, incredible differences between how much projects have inflated compared to other projects. And that doesn't make sense to me because we kind of know what the standard inflation amounts are from other construction projects around the state. Some of these are 30 or 40%. And going, well, are they changing the project? Are they doing something different? And have they been value engineered in order to make them more cost effective? I haven't seen, and I don't know if you provided documentation of how you got from 15 down to 10, but I'd like to see that information as well.
And Don or Elizabeth, if you could mail a link to that particular document, I've not been able to find it. the one with the list of projects. And Josh, I'll follow up on that. In my experience in the past, we were always held responsible for overruns. I mean, we were told budget carefully and bid carefully, and if there's an overrun, it's on you. So what's changed?
Mr. Chairman, I would say that what has changed is that, again, due to COVID and due to the supply chain disruptions as well as the inflation, that things have changed much more dramatically and much quicker than they might have in the past. And so you couldn't see them coming, you couldn't adjust to them. They've been thrust upon you and you have nowhere to go. And to answer the question of value engineering and making sure that we are really cutting as much as we can to still make the project happen, it does depend a bit on the stage of construction. And I think that's where completion level of the project will help us understand that. In those projects where it was possible to value engineer, we've done a heck of a lot of that. In those projects where loans, increasing the loan amount from BRC, in one of those projects that has already been done as well. So they are going to be covering those extra costs. So in the cases where we can, we're utilizing the mechanisms we have, but there are some that are just not able to do that and to do it effectively.
Well, and the document that was provided, basic says it's confidential information. So I don't know if we can openly discuss each project, and I don't want to take the time to do it, but it looks like a lot of them haven't really started yet.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Hicks.
So along that line, Josh, I'm wondering with this request for funding, and I think this ties into what both the co-chairs are talking about. Are we talking about funding 100% of the cost overruns at this point in time with these funds? I know we know what the CPI is. This morning it was 7%. Within any normal engineering project, there's typically a 10% contingency stuff. And I think to Senator Kinski's point, nobody could foresee 7% inflationary costs a year ago. But on the flip side of that, there's already a contingency built into those. And if we're looking at a 30% increase, are we talking about a 30% bailout, or is there going to be shared responsibility above and beyond? And so some of these may be the sponsors out of their control, and some of them may be in their control. So how are you going to evaluate? Are we just looking at a complete, any cost overruns we're going to fund out of these funds?
Please.
Mr. Chairman, and I would say that in this analysis, it was the total cost of the project. So it would be 100% as we're saying it today.
Mr. Chairman, that gives me a little bit of heartburn.
So Josh, when you send this follow-up detail, I do want to make sure follow on with if Representative Nicholas is correct, some of these have not really even broken ground. I'd like those flagged. Hope they aren't mine. Representative Stith.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Durrell, kind of a bigger picture question. Let's imagine that you do not get all of the money that you're asking for, hypothetically speaking. To what extent, if any, can you take advantage of the federal government's state small credit business initiative, Wyoming's $58 million share? How do you see that program working? And can you get some of the things done you want to get done with that new program?
So, Mr. Chairman and Representative Stith, I think if we aren't able to get the budget we have, we're going to look at all of the available investment opportunities, and that is one of them. It just so happens that, again, I don't think we need to get into the weeds of that today, but our investment director, Bert Adam, who's here with us today, has been in charge of developing that program and getting it set up so that we can utilize that 58 million. That becomes an investment tool for us. So we're looking at a number of tools to get these done. We do believe that that this particular request is purely ARPA. We think that the COVID impacts are clearly shown and could be utilized for that. However, we want to extract the economic impact out of all those projects. And so we will we'll do our best to scrape the pennies together to make it happen. And they may come from various piggy banks.
Okay,
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Hicks.
And I hate to digress, but I would like to go back to the last one. I have one specific question, and it comes to expectations with the $10 million on the products that we're going to receive.
Is that which one is that? The
I
gap
believe
funding?
No, I believe it was for the funding to do the studies with
Okay.
potentially Harvard. So
Page,
I want to make sure our expectations are on the same level with the deliverables are. And my concern is when I look at that and I start to run through the time frame. And so, unless even if this was effective immediately, those funds became, what's the time frame to then go back and enter into an agreement with Harvard? What's the time frame that it takes to conduct the studies? And what's the rollout? Because it looks to me like this is a much more longer process, because then we have to go hunt down the industries, be able to bring that stuff in. So what's a realistic time frame from the time that we appropriate the money that we could actually start to see a return on our investment coming back to the state? Is it 4 years, 5 years, 6 years? Because I think this will play into a lot of the discussions. My biggest concern, Mr. Chairman, is that we all have the same expectations if we're going to fund this, what it's going to deliver and what that time frame is.
Mr. Chairman and
Please.
and Senator Hicks, I think it's a great question. And I guess I think that based on what I've seen and not necessarily the speed of change, but just the practicality of change, I think we are talking out there 4 years, 5 years, 6 years to not just, I think we're going to see things immediately that we can adjust. However, I think that in order for that to take hold and be enacted, we're talking that type of time frame. And I think to your point, the longer we push that out, the longer it's going to take to enact it. So I think you're right on the money.
Representative Larson.
So Director Durrell, the conversations that I've participated in on this, my understanding was that Harvard would like to get started soon. And the intent is not to wait. There's not a need to wait to get something into place, crap and get off the pot and move forward with the
So to
idea
speak.
that they would have results back. I'm from Lander, back from by November on some of this initial stuff. So the return back on information, the return back on process is not an extended timeframe. It's, if I understood that correctly, and then the following year, they would take what they gathered from this year, incorporate that into the following year and give you the final recommendations.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman and Representative Larson, that's accurate. I guess I was making more of a commentary on, what it takes to get that stuff enacted. And you're right. We've done everything up to the point of signing the agreement and sending money. We are ready to go. Harvard is ready to go today. So we're ready to roll. They've got a schedule and a plan to do so. And I think, again, the results that we get, there are going to be some things very quickly that we're going to be able to act on. But in order to see those big changes happen, it is going to take a time frame like that 4 to 5 years. So I think we've got to strike now. And again, not to put pressure on it, but it's important to understand that we're not the only one in Harvard's pipeline. It turns out that a lot of people want Harvard to do that work. And so we want to be at the front of that line. We want to be working with their best to do this. So, thank you.
Okay, it's 22 after. What are the last few things that you think it's important for us to touch upon?
So I think probably the best thing to discuss is at the bottom of page 47.
Okay.
And that is, we're asking for an increase to the Business Ready Communities Fund in order to utilize for recruitment and new sector development. I think we've talked pretty much all day about elements that would support this. And that is the new industries that are looking at Wyoming, the new industries that are really on the verge of being here, and the new industries that are coming here that we're going to have to be ready for. And this increase in BRC allows us to have the flexibility and to have the funding that will enable us to take advantage of those new recruitments or those new expansions or those new industries, and to be able to develop the infrastructure to support them. This is a rather large ask, of $100 million into BRC. But what I hope you've seen so far is that the way we are scrutinizing the projects, the way we are looking at our investments, and the fact that we have a process in place with the analysis of these projects, with the board recommendations, and with SLIB approval, we have a mechanism to begin to incite these industries and to be able to get them to take off. So this would be one of those one of those mechanisms to do so. So that's what that ask is for, is to make sure that we're ready for these as they come about. It's there are projects that are out there waiting. There are elements that can be leveraged, and we want to be ready for it.
So the governor said he recommends denial on funding with ARPA. Is this part of the governor's ARPA recommendation?
This particular request is not part of the
Okay.
governor's.
How about the next one, which also is expansion of BRC mission? Did the
That-
governor incorporate
That
that?
one is not. And again, it's a bit awkward for me to say this because I would like to have a budget as high as it could be to fund that growth. But that $10 million was intended to fund more uses of BRC, but those have not been enacted in legislation. So we worked to expand the use of BRC last year. That did not pass committee. And during this interim work, we were unable to create legislation to utilize that. So again, we can make use of that $10 million, but the intent during this budget cycle was to pay for those expanded uses, which are not part of legislation. So that one, I understand.
Representative Larson.
So I guess a question we've had historically, Mr. Chairman, in this committee is, of those mineral royalty grants, how much do we fund to where? And it appears here that your recommendation was to take 8 million of those and bring it over to the BRC program. And normally that would, and I guess that's what we're doing, would be making that decision, but that's kind of we traditionally give you part of those mineral royalty grants, but your request is for this much more out of the mineral royalty grants, which takes it, we'd be removing that from other mineral royalty grant opportunities and putting it to the BRC, correct?
I believe that is correct, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, continue.
So that concludes all of the exception requests that we have and that we wanted to discuss. Again, there are a number of those that were housekeeping that we took care of previously. So that concludes our discussion of our budget and noting that there are some elements that we'll be providing via documentation. Any other questions that you might have?
Co-chairman.
I do have a question, Josh, on your, are there any updates on the audited funds on the CARES Act? How much was it ultimately returned? I think in October, you said there was about 8 million out, or you collected 33.6 out of the received by that time. How much more did you get back?
So, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Co-Chair, that's a good question. We have received since September 30th, we have received $16,265 back from that.
So what's your plan, or is there one?
So, Mr. Co-Chair, we have reverted all of those funds back, and I guess you're saying, what is our plan to go get all of the other outstanding money? What I would say is that we're not designed to function as a collection agency first, so that's a challenge for us. That information has been provided to the Attorney General's office, and I think we're all awaiting what will happen next. That information on who has returned money and who has not has all been provided. I'm guessing at some point there will be another audit from the federal government on that, and we'll be able to provide that. I do not particularly, my agency does not have any plans to begin collecting that.
Don, could you just make sure we have to follow up with the AG to respond to that. And we may want a list of what that is, some of it we may not want to get back. I just don't. Anything on this, on that, Kev?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Chairman, we diligently worked with all the agencies on, first of all, making sure that any unencumbered, unexpended was reverted back. We had a three-step process at the hospitals, the federal grant for PP&E for Department of Health, $8 million for corrections. And then we actually deposited something in the neighborhood of $400,000 into the general fund when we were doing this cleanup. Then we focused on the encumbered amount, and the Treasury's guidance on, I think it was the 12th of December, that actually changed it to the intent. So if the intent is there, then you have the encumbrance, then you can serve for the additional 90 days into 2022. And then after that, what we're looking at is the subrecipients that actually have cash in hand, that what we'd like to have them do is finish these projects with that cash in hand. So we're going to be working with the AG and the Business Council on the subrecipient aspect of this. So that's the status. And I think right now there's something in the neighborhood of $5 million that is in the subrecipient neighborhood that we'd like to find a way to continue to finish those projects between now and the 90 days that we have in 2022.
Okay, I want to make sure that I'm clear. I thought that this money that had been referred to the AG, when you hired those accounting firms to do the audits, some of them were paperwork errors. Some people just needed to get their paperwork correct. But then I thought we came down to this hardcore where companies we couldn't even know were legitimate somehow got the money. I thought that's what we were dealing with. that somehow that money disappeared into the ether.
There has been a couple of those audits that have been finished. And in fact, when that money came back through the Business Council, we did act upon that. And we took that money back into the CARES fund. And then that created a situation where we could actually distribute it to the general fund. So those audits were completed before December 31st. We acted upon those through the B11 process. Then really what you have here now is what I just talked about with the subrecipient aspect. That piece is what we're trying to run down, and those will be subject to the same audit. But what we want to make sure is that if we can, continue to deliver those funds.
Thank you. So I've got it. Anything else for Josh? Anyone else? Representative Walters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Dorrell, going back to your Salesforce request, being the economic expansion agency for the state, have you reached out to any Wyoming-based software companies to try and create a Wyoming-based solution for your issues in this regard?
Mr. Chairman and Representative Walters, that's a good question. So the Salesforce.com is a platform that we utilize. The consultants that we are selecting and working to select, we definitely prefer to utilize Wyoming contractors, and as seen by our new website, which was a Wyoming contractor, and by our communications, we do, whenever we can, we utilize Wyoming contractors. In that case, in that particular software case, there are not contractors within the state that are able to provide the functions that we need for that particular software platform. So unfortunately, so we went through our RFP process, and unfortunately, we were not able to select a Wyoming company for that particular software package. Okay. Thank you.
Anything else from Mr. Dorrell from anyone? Okay, I want to make a couple closing comments, and then I'll turn it over to you to make a couple closing comments. First, I want to commend you on how far you've gotten given the circumstances under which you came. You just showed up. I think you're trying to figure out where your desk was when the whole CARES Act thing hit and COVID and all that sort of thing. So you had an idea going in as to what you were going to do, and that's not what I think that set you behind on your ambitions for at least 12, if not 18 months in terms of getting to the point that you're getting to here now. So I want to commend you for the flexibility and adaptability of the agency and of yourself coming in as a new agency head. Second, I'd like to ask, where are you in terms of, well, in terms of the legislation and your mission? I supported that. I'm sorry that it failed. I think we do need more flexibility. We lost a company to another state. I won't mention the state, but I have a distant relative who is on a regional economic development board. Their regional budget is larger than your entire budget, and they have the ability to make a decision in weeks. They don't have to go through a very protracted cycle. where are you in terms of speeding up that examination and decision-making process? At first, you could get, my recollection back in the day, you could get an interim meeting of the board and an expedited SLIB consideration, and then somehow it came down to, in this quarter, you submit your grant, and then the next quarter we think about it, and then the next quarter it goes to SLIB. It's very protracted, and in the meantime, we lose opportunities. Where are we in terms of accelerating that decision-making process?
Mr. Chairman, first of all, thank you. Where we are in that is that a big piece of 2021, as I mentioned, was working on really our foundational processes and the way that we do things. And our goal first was to map that process. I think if you think about process mapping, the first thing you do is map it out. And then you look at where are the inefficiencies and how can we do that? Again, we're trying to focus in on some of these really big opportunities that are out there. And so to have that protracted and long process is pretty challenging. So that's 2022 is about enacting what we've learned in 2021. We do see some ways that we can make that decision-making process faster. So that's something that we are focused on big time in 2022. And I guess just, Mr. Chairman, if I can provide a couple closing comments. And
Please.
I think in response to your, congratulating our agency on its flexibility and the fact that a lot of change happened really quickly within our agency. I think it speaks a lot to the people that we have. And I think it speaks a lot to their ability to adjust and to flex. And also, I think more than anything, what I would characterize the last couple of years as is there was a lot of collaboration between our agency and the legislative branch. I think if you look at the business relief programs, we were able to do that because we were all working toward the same goal. And I think that that's what we're seeing here and what we want to continue. And I really feel frankly fortunate for the circumstances that we've come into, because I think it's helped us all focus in and really probably get a lot more done because of it, because I think it's opened our eyes to what's possible if we all work together. And so I appreciate your thoughts, and I appreciate this committee, recognizing that while this budget has a lot of exceptions and they are exceptional, I appreciate the discussion around them. And frankly, I appreciate the minds that are at work to make them better, because it's going to take all of us. So I just appreciate the work. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Appreciate your time. Next up is the Insurance Department. While we're swapping out, we can welcome back our chairman, who has returned quasi-victorious, I'm assured.
Have we got 5 minutes?
Yeah, it was just take 5 minutes.
5 minutes? All right, we'll reconvene at 20 till. He's high in the saddle, yeah.
I'll go ahead and come and bring joint appropriations back to order. We've got the insurance department, I believe. And so Director Rude, Commissioner Rude, we're glad to have you.
Appreciate it, sir. Mr. Chairman, committee members, my name's Jeff Root. I'm the insurance commissioner. With me is Ms. Johnson, my deputy. Just by way of a little bit of background about our department, we are the smallest insurance department in the United States with 26 people. Yet we still have to maintain expertise in all of those different areas of law that the larger states still have to maintain. I liken our office to the basketball team in the movie Hoosiers. We have a good starting lineup. We have no bench. So that's really where we're at. So for us, efficiency is paramount. Our 23-24 biennium annual budget is approximately $6.27 million, roughly the same budget that was in 21-22. It includes no state general funds. What we do is we take the 1,157 insurance companies licensed in Wyoming, and we do an assessment, and they each pay an equal assessment. Currently, it's about $2,500 each. Our actual assessments went down this year because we actually had some CARES Act money paid for computers, so our expenses were down, and so that savings then it just reduces the future assessments on the insurance carriers. We bring in approximately $40 million annually through general funds, to general funds through fees and assessments. That's up from $35 million a few years ago. We've just seen a large growth in agents licensed to sell products in the state of Wyoming. There are approximately 180,000 insurance agents who can sell products in the United States. We probably have the highest per capita of agent to populace ratio of any state.
Anything in particular you attribute that to?
I think a little bit of it, Mr. Chairman, was the pandemic. A lot more stuff. Every company wanted agents to be able to sell everywhere. And so we were just part of it. I did look at Nevada, for example, and while they may have 5 times the population of Wyoming, Nevada only has 25% more agents. So there's something there, and I'm not quite sure, but that's my best guess. Our biggest department challenges, the first one is succession planning. And we share the same, obviously, concerns that other agencies have talked about, retention and recruitment. The last 2 years, we saw 42% of our office either move in some way. We either new people coming in or someone in the office moving up to a higher position. So 42% in 2 years. And in the next 5 years, we have close to 50% being retirement eligible. So those are the concerns that we're working on. A couple of the successes I'll just touch on. We reduced our manual transactions and licensing from 6% to 1%. So when you look at those 180,000 agents we license, we reduced 9,000 transactions that we no longer have to touch manually, piece of paper, scanning, anything like that. So that has really helped. Additionally, we also had a one-time $8 million influx payment from the federal government to the state general funds. By way of explanation, this was a result of a Supreme Court case that held that the Trump administration wrongfully withheld Affordable Care Act payments, what was called risk corridor payments, to insurance companies. Well, since we oversaw the liquidation of Win Health, the money came back to us and ultimately ended up in the general funds of the state. With that, we can turn to our exceptions on page 9. Our first priority is an ETS programming request of $46,000 for them to come in and rework one of our databases. We have a database that was designed in-house over 20 years ago. We're fearful it's a little unstable. We need ETS to replace that and be there to work with us in the future if there's any problems. The individual that designed it actually still works for us, but we don't anticipate that he will be staying much longer, and so we just need that to keep that program up and running. And the second priority is for software for our examinations. When we conduct an examination of insurance companies, we have 3 or 4 people working at the exact same time, and this program actually allows real-world time input of all of them at the same time. Currently, we open a program, somebody puts in their stuff, they save it, someone else, they open it, just a matter of efficiency. The other states actually, most other states have this program, and we're able to have save money on a bulk purchase through a national organization that actually purchases of this for any states that want part of it. So that's the second priority. Those are the only two priorities or exceptions that we have. I'd be happy to answer any questions. Okay.
All right, continue.
Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to talk UW women's basketball, but that's all we have.
Okay.
I wish.
There's no game tonight. It got canceled. Yeah.
Mr. Chairman. Mr.
All
Chairman.
right. Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman.
Representative Stitt. Thank you.
Commissioner Rude, there's a proposal to amend some of the insurance statutes that would make it more favorable or attractive for reinsurance companies that are offshore to locate onshore in Wyoming. Let's imagine that that gets passed and then that's a success. And we attract large reinsurance companies to Wyoming. How would that affect, if at all, the operations in your office? Would you need any additional resources, or is that something you would just take with your existing staff that you have?
Go ahead,
Mr.
Jeff.
Chairman, Representative Stiff. Yes, we've worked the past year with one group of folks that are putting together, working with us to domesticate a reinsurance program here in Wyoming. The bill that will be passed will contain an appropriation in our 900 series for us to hire experts in those areas. We actually, Ms. Johnson has been working on a request for proposals now, and we've been receiving some questions concerning them, some clarity involving that. So hopefully we will have the experts there available to us. If it were to truly grow, we might have to do something about that. Either hire, increase the 900 series funding, or bring another person or two and back into the office. But we'll see where it goes. We think we'll get it off the ground here with this legislation in the next year, hopefully.
Yes, go ahead. Representative Kinner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commissioner, I certainly appreciate the role that you all play in collecting the fees and so on and managing all of that. I'm curious what you might say about the fees that we charge in Wyoming relative to the states around us, or are we generally in the ballpark with these other states, or how do we compare with other states in that regard?
Go ahead, Jeff.
All right, Representative Kinner, it depends upon which fees we're talking about. We have actually, for our domestics, pay one of the lowest tax rates on their premium. But the state benefits from higher taxed states that have companies domesticated, for an example, in Ohio, who then sell policies in Wyoming, because they would tax at the higher rate in Ohio. We tax their premiums in a retaliatory way. So in that regards, we receive the same. Our costs for agents, we're always cognizant of what the other states are doing, so we're not out of a line. We've adjusted them slowly in the past 3 or 4 sessions upwards, so we're right where we should be, I think. We're not too high, not too low, but they're fairly consistent.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Appreciate your time and your work. And store recovery. Yeah. Do you want to ask about that? All right. Okay. And it was an oversight by their part. Why is it not? All right. Okay. So who's in charge today? Okay. You gonna let him get away with that? All he has to do is do that? Went that way? Okay. All
Tom's
right.
gonna do it.
All right. Good. So welcome.
Thank you.
Glad to have you. Go ahead. So we're on to the Soil Recovery Institute. So we're glad to have you. We appreciate the work that you do. And we're happy to go through your budget. So we'll go ahead and turn the time over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Our budget, I think, is pretty
You're
simple.
gonna have to, is your mic on, and make sure it's pulled a little closer. So if you can't hear yourself echo, you're not, it's not working quite right.
Okay, is that better?
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think we have a relatively straightforward and easy budget. We have no exceptions. As much as you'd like to discuss or ask questions, I'm happy to answer.
Well, if you could, we'd like to, if you give us a brief overview of kind of where you are and how you're becoming acclimated and what a few things that you think that you're going on and what you see, it's going to be really important for your group over the next couple of years.
Certainly. We have, for those that aren't familiar with EORI, we're located in Casper. We're in the old Amoco refinery building. We have a team of about 10 technical people. And basically, our main objective is to recover stranded oil from oil fields in Wyoming. And we were created legislatively in 2004, initially located at the University of Wyoming and moved to Casper in 2018. And we've been there since then. We're a technical group of engineers, geologists, and we provide technical services for operators in the oil field in Wyoming. Historically, 2005 to 18 timeframe, our budget's roughly 2 million a year. That would be 13 years, 26 million. The estimated or calculated tax benefit to the state during that time frame was $270 million, directly attributable to work EORI does in the oil field. So we have an important role in the state. There's significant oil reserves remaining in conventional fields that have never been water flooded or had any type of technical work done on them. We estimate close to 1 billion barrels of recoverable reserves through the type of work we do, which would net a sizable tax revenue to the state. As I said, we're 10 people. We have had some pretty significant budget cuts starting with 2018-19 biennium. Our original budget prior to the cuts was roughly 5.2. We're at just a little over 4 million now. But we did lose a third of our staff through budget cuts, but we've managed to continue working effectively. And we're pleased to answer any questions you might have.
Okay, thank you. Tom, did you have something?
If I may, or
Representative
you-
Walters, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Whitman, the University of Wyoming has housed some money for the EORI, and it's just sitting in an account at the university. A little bit more discussion on that, as well as how we might go about getting that retrieved from the university and back in your coffers to do good work.
Yes, thank you, Representative Walters. We were made aware in the spring of about $2.1 million, of budget money that was not reverted back to the state, money we did not spend during budget cycles going back to 2007. That's been in an account at the university. and they approached me asking, please take some type of process forward to take that cash off of their books. So we have had meetings with a variety of people at the university in regards to that 2.1, which is actually now about 1.9, a little over $1.9 million through some budget adjustments that they took cash money out of that account. We had a couple of meetings, as I said, where this was discussed. Their suggestion was that we bring this here to joint appropriations, that they would ask only for a letter from the appropriate authorities here on returning that money to EORI or what you would like done with it. I developed some numbers for you, Representative Walters, about how we could very happily use that $1.9 million of former budget money due to the budget cuts in the past and additional work that's been put our direction, largely with the CCUS world and our experience subsurface on storage developments in Wyoming for CO2. A number of things we've taken on at the Institute.
Thank you. That's just interested. We heard a little bit from Dr. Peary about some work that he's going on where he thinks that they can significantly enhance the recovery of oil through some other techniques that they're working on. I just wondered if y'all were familiar with that and if you had any comments or thoughts about that proposal.
Yeah, yes, sir. Mr. Chairman, we work very closely actually with Mohammed, with Dr. Peary and his lab. It's certainly one of the most sophisticated probably in the world for core analysis. And he does a lot of work in his laboratory about improved and enhancing recoveries through core analysis. So yes, there's quite a link between us. I'm aware of some projects that he has down around Cheyenne, if that's the one that you were made aware of. I know he's got a little group of operators that are working to look at improved recovery on laterals, on horizontal wells through core analysis.
He did that, and then he also, there was another proposal where actually they think that they can through, I think it's I can't remember, it's some kind of chemical, it's just an additional chemical that they put into fluid that they can, that through the existing fractures that they can actually recover another 10% or so, which is obviously, since that, that basically almost doubles the amount of oils that you can recover from a reservoir at this point. So anyway, there's just some exciting things going on that are very important for some older, but still significant amounts of oil in the ground in those existing fields.
That's exactly right. And there are new technologies coming, Mr. Chairman, that look very promising. We do a lot of test work in the oil field. One of the main areas of high success for us is pilot tests, where we will fund part of a project with an operator to see what kind of results they can get if it's a little bit higher risk. That's proven to be quite successful. We've seen fields quadruple their production through techniques like you're talking about with Dr. Peary. So yeah, there's some important reserves out there. Your standard oil field, you're lucky if you get 15 to 20% out. So an additional 10, additional 30 or 40 is significant.
Right.
So, Mr.
Go ahead, Mr.
So,
Chair.
do you evaluate like Mohammed's work and his numbers and verify them, or his technique? I mean, how do you interrelate with him?
Well, we don't work with Mohammed that way. I mean, his lab isn't really associated with EORI. He had been under the School of Energy Resources, and I think that's been readjusted, and he's got a little different position at the university than that. No, it would. We look for collaborative projects, Representative, where we can use facilities of Dr. Peary. Our hope has always been to get Wyoming rock in his lab and see some of the magnificent work that he has available through his lab done on Wyoming rocks.
And so there's a proposal now in front of us to use ARPA dollars for this new technique that the co-chair just discussed. You know, it's a $25 million ask that is a partnership with various other large players. And so what my question is, are you familiar with it, what he's doing? Because what we'd like is, if possible, is some expertise to say, yeah, this is a good idea, and you know, it's a good investment. Returns are likely, and it's I mean, we're just legislators. My question is, can you advise us in that regard?
Mr. Chair, we haven't seen that actual project document. We haven't been asked to review that. It's certainly something we could take a look at. We have worked collaboratively with Mohammed.
I think you can go through Laramie on the way home, probably.
That is a possibility. Never say no. But we'd be happy to if that's helpful.
It only adds about 45 minutes to your drive. I've done that many times.
Yeah, sometimes you have to.
Okay, yeah, you know, I think we've got an interesting proposal on, you know, obviously some of that becomes proprietary and very, but you know, it'd be nice to have, it would be nice to have another set of eyes look at that and you know, getting another 10% out of existing Wyoming fields is huge.
Do you have Mohammed on speed dial? You can call him and let us know.
Actually, I do.
I presume
The
that's-
phone is shaking. I'm not sure that's him.
Okay, thank you. Anything else for our friends from EORI? Anything else? Thank you, Lon.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Sorry. Could I comment on Representative Walter's question about the?
Oh, too late. We're past. No,
Sorry.
yes, of course you can.
I
Of
couldn't
course
hit
you
my
can.
button quick enough. Just wanted to let you know that that is on.
Are you
sorry.
okay? There we go.
I
Thank you.
just wanted to let you know that that is on the list of proposed governor's letters that we need to review with the governor to see if we'll bring you guys on Friday.
Okay, so we'll see that on Friday.
Does he want to?
That's it.
I'm right once in a while, Lon.
You are.
Yeah. Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I can provide you documentation if you'd like on how we would like to use that $1.9 million that's been presented to Representative Walters, but I have that if you. need
We'll get
more
Representative Walters to share that with us, and I'm sure when we hear the letter that we'll look at that. So
Okay,
thank you.
If you need anything, we're happy to provide.
We'll share it with you.
And we won't be shy about asking. So
Thank you.
Yeah.
Please do. And I'll let you know about Mohammed.
All right, thank you. Appreciate that.
Thank you very much.
You ready for a break?
Sure. That's right. I just got here. You guys have been working for a while.
I
Yes.
was just kidding. We have-
Oh, okay. You want another one? Okay. I think next we're on OSLI.
I brought it.
$80, $70. $60. Good morning, Director.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman.
How are we doing today?
Pardon me?
How are we today?
We are doing well.
Well, we're excited.
Fabulous.
We're good. We're excited to have OSLI in front of us. So Jason and Bill, it's good to see you. And so we're happy to go through your budget. We do, what we've been doing for the most part is if you want to just run us through unit by unit and let us know if there's anything particular about that unit and just a high level general overview where Brainerd's what your office does. And then, of course, when you get to the unit and you want to talk about your exception requests in particular in those units, then we'd love to hear from you about that. Okay, does that sound okay?
Yes.
And
Mr.
anything else that you've got for us, we're happy to hear. Of course.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We do have a few opening remarks. We'll try to keep it brief. I wanted to introduce the team here. I hope we have all the right folks to answer your questions. To my right is Deputy Director Jason Crowder. We also have State Forester Bill Crapser. Behind us, we have Amanda Sewell. She's the Assistant Director for our Administrative and Financial Services Division. And we have Beth Blackwell, who is our Grants and Loans Manager. So with that, just to reorient everybody, the Office of State Lands and Investments is the administrative arm for the Board of Land Commissioners and the State Loan and Investment Board. OSLI is responsible to carry out the policy directives and decisions of those two boards. We have about 104 authorized employees, 95 full-time, 4 part-time, and 5 AWEC employees. The Wyoming Constitution and the state legislature direct the Board of Land Commissioners to manage trust assets, which are comprised of 3.5 million surface acres of state trust land, 3.9 million acres of state trust minerals, and the State Permanent Land Fund. They're managed for key purposes consistent with traditional trust principles. In that regard, that's long-term growth and value and optimum sustainable revenue production. The trust assets serve the trust beneficiaries, which are largely Wyoming's school children, K through 12 education, and certain state institutions. The State Loan and Investment Board manages the permanent land funds in accordance with the state's investment policy, and it administers various statutorily created grant and loan programs that provide funding and financial assistance in the form of grants and loans to cities, towns, counties, and special districts to finance capital construction and other infrastructure necessary for the health, safety, and general welfare of the residents of Wyoming. We have 4 divisions within the agency. We have the Trust Land Management Division. It manages and authorizes activities on state trust lands. We have the Field Services Division, which conducts inspections, appraisals, addresses weed and pest and other surface management issues. We have the Forestry Division, which is directed by State Forester Crapser. He directs all forest interests and matters pertaining to forestry within Wyoming and is responsible for fire suppression for the 3.5 million trust land surface acres. And then we have our Financial Programs and Management Division, which contains our Grants and Loans Division, the administrative operations of the agency, and our royalty compliance for the state trust lands. Our standard budget is and some agency successes. Just like you've been hearing, I think, over and over from some of the agencies, we have also faced recruiting, hiring, and retention of employee issues. We are trying to do those things within our power to retain employees, such as working through some flexibility for staff. During the COVID outbreak, a lot of folks were teleworking and working from home. Unfortunately, that wasn't sort of optimal for us because a lot of what we do requires constant collaboration and discussion. And so sometimes it's hard to continue that. But we're hoping to continue to figure out ways that telework can work for our employees as well as more flexible work schedules. We are a pretty lean agency. We have 1-person program managers. And so we don't like to lose employees. We don't like it when they leave because we invest a significant amount of time in training. And we do have those who have a lot of historic knowledge, such as Deputy Crowder. And so those folks are important. So to the extent that we can accommodate some flexibility within the workplace, we certainly want to do that. So that's how we're addressing that. One of our top priorities, as I've mentioned for the agency, is revenue generation. Mineral leasing revenue makes up about 85% of the OSLI trust land revenue. In particular, oil and gas revenue accounts for about 75% of our revenue. In fiscal year 19, our total annual revenue was down 194 million from the 243 million in fiscal year 15. We attribute this to the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic and the extreme drop in oil prices that were incurred, where prices went to zero and even negative numbers. In fiscal year 20 and 21, revenues have dropped by 48 million and 93 million respectively. The economy and impacts to the energy industry have been obviously concerning to OSLI. So we are looking for opportunities to diversify uses of the trust assets to mitigate the effects of these radical market fluctuations. We're looking at our oil and gas leasing practices and policies to see if there are ways to further stimulate mineral leasing and development on state trust lands. Additionally, we're looking for new ways to proactively bring in and generate revenue related to trust land uses and development. Many of you have probably heard how OSLI and the Board of Land Commissioners held a working session in Teton County last summer to explore potential development opportunities. The board held a listening session so that it could hear the values of the local community in conjunction with evaluating development possibilities. The board is now exploring the use of potentially the RFP process to actively seek revenue generation opportunities in Teton County, but we'll continue to listen to the community, and any decisions will consider the input from the local community. That's important to us. Another
Representative Schwartz, did you have something?
uh-oh.
You look like you just couldn't help yourself.
I can help myself, but thanks for asking, Mr. Chairman.
All right, all right.
I'll let Jennifer proceed.
Thank you. Go ahead, please continue.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Another thing that we're exploring is we'll address affordable housing. In an effort to further diversify revenue streams, we're analyzing how we can assist with the affordable housing needs of municipalities across the state through retained land ownership. Historically, what we've done, we've exchanged lands out of areas where development is primed and ready to occur into lands that have future development potential, and we've tried to ride that appreciation wave. This new effort is looking into possible enhanced revenue by retaining ownership into development to a point that may not only increase value, but also add an additional revenue stream. So we're out there, we're trying to come up with new ideas. We're not just relying on minerals and oil and gas. We're trying to be proactive. Agency successes, I would tout the CARES Act program in 2020. Our grants and loans folks worked through the program, and with the approval of the State Loan and Investment Board, the program awarded grants to municipalities, counties, tribes, and healthcare facilities to address the COVID-19 pandemic. 422 grants were approved for over $222 million. And this was all while our grants and loan staff continued to manage their other day-to-day activities. Additional successes, we were able to streamline 7 and repeal 12 chapters within SLIBs, rules and regulations. Some of the revisions included adding a tiered low interest rates and large loan interest rate incentives for the clean water SRF and drinking water SRF programs for use when an applicant qualifies for principal forgiveness in those programs and there's none available. And in fact, in December, I think it was Green River that requested that the SLIB combine a couple of its SRF loans so that it could utilize the new large loan in program interest rates. It was able to save them millions of dollars in interest that could then be utilized for increased construction costs occurring due to the supply chain issues. So we feel like those might be the way to get some more or stimulate some more interest in the SRF programs. Also, our real estate program continues to be a success on the Board of Land Commissioners side. Since 2006, OSLI has increased annual investment revenue by $3,288,000. We've increased publicly accessible acreage by 37,440 acres and maintained ownership acreages within the legislative directives. So With that, Mr. Chairman, I believe State Forester Crapser has some successes and challenges that he may wish to contribute here as well for the Forestry Division.
Thank you, Director. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, good morning. Bill Crapser, State Forester. Probably the director mentioned staffing and retention. That's an ongoing issue, I think, for all of us throughout the state. Probably two of our biggest challenges State Forestry has been facing is recovery from the bark beetle epidemic. We have, as all of you know, driving around the state, we have dead trees on all ownerships from the bark beetle, and just working with our federal partners, with landowners and with other agencies to start recovering the forest from bark beetle. The second large challenge we have is wildfire across the West. As we all know, wildfires are getting larger, more within the urban interface, more dangerous, and we're seeing the same thing in Wyoming, and it has put a strain on the entire system. As far as a couple of successes, I'll stay with fire. A couple of years ago, we did convince our federal partners to work with us on an aggressive initial attack, or more aggressive than they had been doing in the past. It's been really successful for us. Your all support with the single engineer tankers and with our heliTAC have really made a big difference the last couple of years. Probably the town of Pine Haven is the best example this last summer of a fire where if we hadn't had those seats and heliTAC there as quick as we did, they would have lost a significant number of homes in town instead of one. Other than that, big success has been our efficiency in our entire fire business program. We've spent a lot of time and effort really streamlining that and trying to make that a lot more efficient. Finally, Mr. Chairman, and I'm not sure, I don't know whether I should have put this in a challenge or a opportunity and a good thing for the state, but your state forester is starting to contemplate life after state government. So that like I said, I'm not sure if that's a challenge looking forward for state forestry or a really big opportunity looking forward for state forestry.
Oh, we appreciate you still have a lot of your hair, so you're hanging in there, Bill. So that's important. I mean, it's important. Obviously that's part of what the director talked about in succession planning and how we do that. But we do appreciate your service to the state of Wyoming. You've made a big difference.
Oh, Mr. Chairman, I'm not leaving tomorrow. I'm just contemplating. At least I'm not planning on leaving tomorrow. I could be told different.
Okay, well, you're obviously you're welcome as long as you want to stay, but we understand that life moves on for all of us at one point or another. So, but we do appreciate your service and Wyoming forests are amazingly healthy even particularly in comparison to what we see on our neighboring federal forest lands in the same state. So it's remarkable. And so we appreciate the proactive stance of forestry in Wyoming. So with that, Director,
Mr. Chairman, we are ready to move through the budget if the committee is ready.
sure, go ahead. And if we've got questions, we'll butt in as we go along.
Sounds
All
terrific.
right, thank you.
Okay, we'll begin with Unit 101, our Operations, Administration and Support. That's found on page 22. Our first exception in this unit is actually found on page 25, which is our exception request related to computer hardware and software in the amount of $25,321. These are funds for the purchase and replacement of existing computer equipment. It's the usual updating. This amount may seem low, but the bulk of OSLI's computers were updated in the last biennium. The list of replacement equipment for the biennium was provided to ETS for approval, and we received the approval numbers, which I believe are listed in the budget book. Requests also include monitors and annual Adobe subscriptions. And this exception will help the agency continue its efficiencies and effectiveness through data automation. And I would note that the governor has recommended approval of this exception request.
All right, thank you.
The next exception request found in this unit is found on page 26. It's professional fees for the investment consultant in the amount of $150,414. The amount requested is for funding an increase for the contractual fee associated with the investment consultant contract approved by the State Loan and Investment Board. Since November of 1996, SLIB has contracted for investment consultant services to assist in fulfilling its role for oversight of state investments as per Wyoming Statute 94714 and 94721. In this case, an RFP was issued on February 5th, 2020. Term of the selected contract is July 1, 2020 through June 30th of 2024. Contract has an annual fee of $375,000 for the first 3 years, and for the
Mr.
fourth
Chairman,
year,
I think she's on.
$375,000 plus the greater of the prior year's
Mr.
percent.
Chairman, just a minute. What page are you on? I'm
Oh,
sorry.
I'm sorry. We are on page 26.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. So for the fourth year, the 375,000 plus the greater of the prior year's percent change in CPI or 3% for a maximum of $386,250. The contract fees for the 2023-2024 biennium total $761,250 or $50, and the standard budget reflects $610,836,000 plus. So an additional $150,414 is requested to pay the contract fees. Again, the governor has recommended approval of this exception request.
So in hindsight, we probably should have just gone with 3%.
Probably.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, go ahead, Representative Steph.
Director Scoggins, I'm on the investment consultant. I should know this, but can you just explain why it is that you need an investment consultant that is, I thought your funds would be managed by the State Treasurer's Office or part of the number of funds that are under its purview. How does what you do relate to what the State Treasurer's Office does?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Stith, we, as I mentioned, are sort of the administrative arm for the SLIB board, and the SLIB enters into the investment contract. The investment contract is negotiated through the Treasurer's Office. We're just sort of on the administration, paying the bills, if you will. Mr. Chairman, I would defer to Amanda Sewell. Would you have any more information on that?
Mr. Chairman, Amanda Sewell.
So hang on one second, Amanda. We need to get you to a mic, or we'll bring you the karaoke mic. It's coming on its way right here.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, Representative Smith. As Director Scoggins said, we are the administrative arm of the board, and by statute 947. The appropriation is to come to the state.
Right, and I'm sorry, my understanding is just so much less than it should be. What is this person doing? What funds is this person managing, or is this person helping you negotiate the contracts with the fund managers? I'm just confused about what the person does.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Smith, Stith, this is not a person, but it is the investment consultant that works with the State Treasurer's Office, and RVK is the current company that the contract is with, and they work with the Treasurer's Office and the SLIB board.
Okay, other questions? Thank
Thanks,
you.
Amanda. Okay, Mr. Chairman, moving along then, the next exception request is found on page 27, which is our human resources manager, or it's the HRD consolidation with ANI. The amount is $212,883. The request is required for the HRD consolidation to ANI. This amount is related to our current human resources manager. And again, the governor's recommended approval of this exception request.
Thank you. Is Representative Walter?
Thank you,
still
Mr.
asking
Chairman.
His questions. Thank you, Representative Walter.
I'm sure you've been listening to other agencies and understand where the question is going, but really, this individual or individuals, are they still housed within your office? And then how has the transition gone? Has it been smooth? What hiccups have you seen, if any? Just general discussion on that, please.
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Walters, yes, our human resources manager is still housed within our offices in the Hirschler building. we're still going through, I think, some growing pains within consolidation, trying to understand the structure and the reporting relationships and all those things. So that's to be expected with transition. Fortunately, our HR manager is a rock star, and so we're very spoiled. We're used to having all of her undivided attention and time to address our issues and to be incorporated into our agency with everything from morale issues to you name it. With the consolidation, HRD, I think they've recognized she's a rock star, and so they've asked her to cover other agencies when they've had other things come up. They've asked her to be included on additional projects and things. So our ability to utilize her and have her at our beck and call has been diminished a little bit, but we're trying to work through that. And like I said, I get it. She's a rock star. Everybody wants her time. So.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative Walters. All right, continue on, Director.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Next, we move into Unit 102, which is the Trust Land Management Division. That's on page 32. Our next exception request is found on page 40, which is the State Trust Land Preservation and Enhancement Account. And Mr. Chairman, I would yield to Deputy Director Crowder. He is our expert on the TP&E account.
Thank you. Jason, good to see you.
Good to see you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. The Trust Preservation and Enhancement Account was started in 2005, and it was funded with $750,000 on a biennial basis. That has since been reduced to today's request through time of $340,907. It's the agency's only account to manage land management projects across the state. It's used for timber stand improvements, fuel reduction projects, surveys, road maintenance and closure projects, range improvements, capital improvements on the ranches that the state owns, dump and hazardous site cleanups, and analysis of any new or enhanced revenue producing opportunities. The largest project that we've had within this account, the committee may remember, was the Tin Can Alley dump cleanup outside of Grable. That totaled over $1.3 million, and that project came out of this account. It could have only come out of this account. This request is to replenish the TP&E account. It's not part of our standard budget, and we've used it ever since 2005. However, we come each and every biennial budget as an exception to have it added to our operations. So this isn't part of the agency's standard budget. And again, the governor has recommended approval of this exception request, and I'm happy to answer any questions you would have.
Thank you. Go ahead. Representative Larson.
So Jason and Director Scoggin, to your point that you come every biennial to make an exception request for this fund that you know you need, is there a reason we don't include it in your standard budget?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, it was the legislature's intent that it not be included. We're happy to have it part of our standard budget, but we're just applying the legislative intent for it. It's important to note that it's not all general funds going into this account too. The legislature made the conscious decision that the school foundation account to fund this as well. So perhaps that amount of interest in the account is the reason why it becomes an exception.
Well, and I understand that. So further conversation we'll have on this side. Thank you.
So is it, Jason, is that like an impressed fund? So this just replenishes it back to the 750,000?
Mr. Chairman, it doesn't replenish back to that amount. It replenishes back to 340,000.
340. And so how do you do a $1.3 million job in Tin Can Alley with $340,000?
Mr. Chairman, that's a great question, and it's continual requests of the legislature to put more funding into it for that specific project.
But at the end of the day, the concept is pretty simple. If we can improve or maintain or clean up state lands, the object is that we may obtain a better one. It's a duty with fiduciary duty with respect to the state trust lands themselves. But two, the other idea is that it has potential to raise additional income. Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, that's absolutely correct, or sustain the income that we're currently realizing. We put a lot of burden on the state's lessees and contractors to maintain the land that they're working on, and this just helps supplement that in a small way.
Do you have a list of specific projects that you're contemplating coming up?
Mr. Chairman, we do, and we keep a list of past projects and where the money has been spent across the state. We provide that report each year to the Joint Agricultural Committee.
Okay, do we have that in our in our agency handouts? Did you have you given
Mr.
us a copy of that?
Mr. Chairman, we can get a copy from the.
Okay. Why don't you, if you could, yeah, if you can just get us a copy of that report, or better yet, if there's a summary table in there, we'd love to see that, I think.
Mr.
And
Chairman?
are you still using your, one more second, are you still using the database program that you put together 2 years ago?
Mr. Chairman, I think you're referring to the SLAM system, and yes,
Yes.
we are using it, and it is coming up in our conversation.
Okay, well, we'll wait. Yeah, so let me rephrase that. Your award-winning database system that you.
Mr. Chairman?
Anyway, go ahead, Representative Larson.
So Director and Jason, have you been able to maintain the needs of state lands by the intent of this fund at this 340 level? I mean, it was at 750, we've reduced it to 340, is where you're at now. Does that, I mean, do you fall behind? Are you okay? I just trying to follow on to the previous question I asked.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, that's a great question as well. We match projects to available funding, so there's never a lack of projects. When we had 750,000 in the account, we utilized all of that. And in fact, we're not planning on reverting any of this funding either. So whatever funding we can have in the account, we'll have projects to match to it.
Mr. Chairman?
Go ahead.
So along those lines, this isn't 100% funded by Office of State Lands. And so a lot of these projects are matched for multiple other entities that actually make investments into the productivity or the production or protection of state lands. Is that correct? And so under that scenario, do we know how much we've been able to leverage and other contributions for the management of state lands? And certainly an increased budget would facilitate more investment by third parties. Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Hicks, that's correct. And that expands on what Representative Larson was saying. We have a ranking system internally that the Board of Land Commissioners considers each time it approves a project. One of the major focus points is, are there other interested parties in the project? And do they bring funding to the table, or do they bring political acceptance to the project or something like that? But each and every time we are trying to stretch these funds as far as they can go. $340,000 across 3.4 million acres doesn't go too far. And when we can leverage third-party partners, as the senator indicated, then that project ranks higher and above others, and we do those first. But for Senator Hicks, we can absolutely give you a report of how much that leverage has been, and we don't have it right.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Representative Schwartz, and then we'll go to, did I see another hand over there? Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So this replenishment in the statute, is it required to be school foundation money, or do we have a choice?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Schwartz, I believe you have a choice. I don't think there's a requirement.
Thank you. Representative Susan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Scoggin, may I direct a question to Jason? When I served on the Agriculture, Water Resources, State and Public Lands Committee, one of our priorities was to identify and to address our landlocked parcels of land that the state owns with minimal or no access to them. Has there been any improvements in that area, or been any initiatives from your department to try to access those parcels?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Simpson. We have made some efforts. Some of those have been limited by the adjoining private landowners, if that's how they're isolated. You have to have a willing party to allow us access across there for whatever purpose, if it's recreation or commercial. The Board of Land Commissioners has just approved a set of rules for an expedited land exchange process. If a parcel is small and really doesn't bring with it a lot of controversy from the public side, the recreational side, but provides greater public access and commercial access, then it's created an expedited process to move those exchanges through quicker. We've also identified stranded lands within the federal government ownership, those being within ACECs or wilderness study areas, or even within roadless areas. And we've identified those as higher priorities to discuss with them land exchange proposals going forward. And again, that's a much slower process, but we have identified those and we've had the conversations early on with the state office here in Cheyenne with the BLM specifically.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The reason this is really important to us as appropriators is because when a parcel of land is isolated and landlocked, we can only obtain a minimal rate of return on that because it's usually the neighbor that leases it. But if we can get more of those lands opened up, then we can demand a greater revenue off of those parcels.
Thank you. Other questions? Any other questions? All right, go ahead and continue.
Mr. Chairman, the next exception within this unit is found at page 44. And as you were referring to earlier, Mr. Chairman, this is our SLAMS maintenance, which stands for Surface Land Asset Management System, which is, again, Jason's brainchild. So I will defer to him on this exception as well.
Go ahead, Jason.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This system, we call it the SLAM system, the Surface Land Asset Management System, is the core system for our agency. We have through time, or specifically since 2005, conducted a concentrated effort to get out of the paper realm and get into a electronic and fortunately web-based realm so that all information is couched in one place and we don't have siloed information or siloed data processes. And every program manager internal to the office can see the same thing at the same time, and it's real-time data. We've moved all of our surface leasing processes into the system, all of our temporary permits, our easements, our grazing and agricultural leases, our renewable energy leases, our timber sales, real estate transactions, and inspections. And along with that, not only comes those processes, but comes all the land, all the millions of acres that the director spoke about. We've parsed those out into 40-acre chunks and created individual records for each one of those, and those are managed within the system. And it's not only a legal description of each one of those parcels, but there is a history of how it was acquired, why it was acquired, and if it was disposed, how did that occur? And there's a reference to the documents. We can easily find the deed or the patent that constituted that transaction. And on top of that, obviously, we're a revenue generating agency, and each one of those leases in the system generates some kind of revenue. So we have the accounting functions within the system as well that categorize and identify each one of the dollars that are intended to be paid against a lease and creates all of the bills so that the lessees and the permittees get their bills on time and are invoiced appropriately. It also categorizes all those funds to be appropriately distributed within WOLS. Within the last year, we have completed one of our final major enhancements to the system, and that was creating an online public portal through our website. And now the public can submit payments online. They can submit applications online through the portal, and it provides real-time data out of our database to the public in a tabular searchable situation or through a mapping function. The last thing that we did over the last year was fold in all of our mineral leases. So really the only thing that occurs on state trust land that's not part of this system now are royalty payments. And you can imagine that those are very complex, and the existing system we had does a great job at managing those. So we're not pulling those in. However, a member of the public or internal staff can now look at a piece of property and see every use that's ever been couched on it, that is currently being had on it, and how to contact individuals who are associated with it. And so it's a very powerful system. We enjoy it greatly. It's web-based, so it's been great to push this out into our field offices and even into our field trucks as individuals are driving across the state. Our fire staff use it a lot when we're talking about where to put dip sites for fires, who to contact to make sure that that is all done appropriate. So it's done a great job of getting the data out of the office and into the hands of the users going forward. The request that we have today is to further that system in a maintenance and support type way. We've worked really hard over the several years to develop this system, and now we have so much data in it that we need to ensure that there's data integrity associated with it, that the users and specifically the public making business decisions based on that data can trust it and can move forward with their business decisions in the state. So what we are proposing to do in this project is to dig into the data, ensure it has integrity, ensure that the redundancies are limited, ensure that the data provided to the public is well, meets the integrity and has validation behind it. It's important to note that the governor did recommend this exception request and that the ETS has also recommended approval of this project.
So, Mr. Co-Chair,
Go ahead, Mr. Co-Chair.
I don't know why you didn't ask for 200,000 instead of 199. But my question is this a contract for your developer just to go in and kind of purge and clean up the system? Is that what it is?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chair, it will be a contract. We'll go out for proposals on the type of work that we need. We've recognized there are a lot of parties out there that are poised and available to do this type of work on the Salesforce platform, and we would create a contract.
So how did you come up with the amount you're asking?
And Mr. Chairman, this amount is a bit of a look forward into the future. The last enhancement project that we completed was just under $500,000. And we expect just to be able to look into the hundreds of thousands and almost million records within the system. It will take some time and effort, and understanding the effort that we just went through with our contractor at that time, who was a great strategic partner for us. The $200,000 they thought would be appropriate for this type of request.
So, Mr. Co-Chair, one of the issues is this, now that you put this number on it, that's what they're going to charge. We have that with various agencies, but if we can figure out a better way to do it, we ought to. Thanks.
Yeah, just disclosing what you're willing to pay early on is not necessarily good for competitive bids. That's the only point. So thank you. Any other questions about this exception request? Okay, thank you. Anything else before we move on? Okay.
Mr. Chairman, that brings us to our next unit, which is 103, which is.
Before you leave this unit, on the trust land management, in a different context, we were looking at what some other states were doing with respect to consolidation of funds and things. We came across state of Idaho, which has created a trust where they pulled all of their lands under common management and both financial and how they account for it and how they take care of it. So the first question I have for you before we leave this area is, are there any lands that the state owns that are not under the OSLI supervision? Maybe the penitentiary fund, but I don't know any. Couldn't think of any other.
State hospital.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, that's a great question. There are a lot of lands that aren't under the purview of the Office of State Lands and Investments. Through time, the legislature has put management responsibility of those lands on it. As Representative Larson mentioned, the state hospital or those owned by the Department of Health, Department of Corrections, and Department of Family Services, the management of those excess lands were put under the jurisdiction of the board. But there are other lands, Game and Fish owns lands, Department of Transportation, and those that we don't manage.
Okay. All right, thank you. Go ahead, Senator Drew.
So just taking off on that, I remember those sheets and looking at those different states that we had. So that was kind of leading to my question. You talked about it earlier. The director talked about it earlier, and we in Teton County appreciate all the attention that you've showered upon us and all the time that you've given us. It's great. And my question though is about 3.5 million acres of state lands out there that you have under your control. How's the rest of them doing? And do these reports in this SLAM system, can we in the public, because my constituents ask me this all the time, they go, with the listening sessions, with what we've done in Teton County, is this being replicated in the other counties? How's this working with all the other state lands that are under your control and that? And I know I'm sure they're taking care of that. And so is this a system that we go to find all that information that we can point to and that we can work on that? And how's that going? Just talk a little bit about that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Guru, that's a great question. And we are looking at all lands across all counties. Teton County is special, one, because the legislature indicated we should look at it. And two, it has probably the most high value parcels that are not utilized by other leases compared to other lands in counties. But yes, you can look on our website on the mapping functions. You can open up any of the parcels and it indicates how much revenue is being derived off of that specific parcel. And that is coming out of the system.
It's okay. Oh, there we go. Now we're on. Yeah, we're back. Okay, so, and I understand about our county having the, the value, but like I said, once again, if you looked at all the rest of the 3.5 million acres and added that up, I'm sure we could probably come up with a number that vastly exceeds the number in Teton County, just in just smaller amounts. So that's what I'm just getting at and say, how do you delineate those? How do you make sure that everyone in the state that's leasing land from the state is paying a fair rate of return based on the value of those lands? Those are the questions that I get asked a lot. And so, and how do we make sure that that's happening? And how do we have that assurance across the board?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Gruitt, another great question. And we have identified parcels all across the state that have possibly greater potential than what they're currently being utilized at. As the director mentioned, we're looking at parcels around Cheyenne here to help in the affordable housing discussion. And that is another extra thing that's not currently being utilized on those.
Could you pull your mic just a little closer?
Sorry. And also on Casper Mountain, we've identified a parcel there that has commercial opportunities, and we're pursuing those. The parcel in Teton County next to Teton Village that we've historically used for commercial purposes, we're ever expanding that effort to request for proposals right now to understand what's the best use of that property and what's the best payment derived out of that property. But each and every lease that we recommend approval to the Board of Land Commissioners, separate from grazing and agricultural leasing, goes through an appraisal process. We have an appraisal staff that looks at every single one, and they determine comparables. They try to pull that into the use that's proposed. And if they can't find comparables, they go off of land value to determine what that appropriate rate is. But every single one gets looked at in an appraisal sense to make sure that we're hitting as close as possible to market rates in the area for the use.
Go ahead. About grazing lands, those are segregated out and have a different value. Why is that?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Garud, those values are derived based off of a formula within existing state statute and further refined by the Board of Land Commissioners. So we take a 5-year average of market rates based on NAS data, run it through the formula that's within the statute, and it spits out a value per acre.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Other questions? All right, continue.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The next unit, 103, is the Clean Water Revolving Fund. That's found on page 48. Our next exception is on page 52 within that unit. It's to increase the Clean Water SRF program funding in the amount of $20,821,067. The reauthorization of the Safe Drinking Water Act is expected to double the federal appropriation to the Clean Water SRF program, which doubles the state's allotment and required 20% match. The capitalization grants for the 23-24 biennial fiscal year are estimated to be about 37.3 million. The standard budget for biennial fiscal year 23-24 is 16.6 million. So OSLI requires an additional 20+ million in order to take advantage of the clean water funds as they become available. Those funds are made up, 16.6 million will be federal funds. And then, of course, the 20% state match, which comes out of the DEQ corrective action account in the amount of 4.1 million. The governor has recommended approval of this exception request.
All right. Thank
Mr.
you.
Chairman,
Go ahead.
a
Go ahead,
quick
Senator.
for this director, and it'll be a little bit circular, but stick with me and we'll get there. So 3 years ago, the governor had come with a request to put an ombudsman type position in the office there to help guide smaller communities towards different grant programs like SRF and some of these. So what's the status? Was that position lost with the budget cuts, or is that position still in the office?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Hicks, I'm going to have to defer to Beth Blackwell. She's our grants and loans manager. I think you're referring, Senator, I think you're referring to the engineer position.
Correct.
That was funded a couple of years ago. We still do have that position. That position, as you indicated, is supposed to go out and help smaller communities and whatnot assist them with their applications for the different grant and loan programs. Unfortunately, the COVID-19 pandemic has influenced the ability of our engineer to get out in the field and do those things. We have done some Zoom platform meetings that people can join to get specific information on the programs there. We just had a turnover in that position recently, so the individual we have in that role now is new. But so we've also utilized that position to help us analyze the SRF and MRG applications with respect to, are these good projects? Are they not good projects? Are they too expensive? Are they overinflated? What's going on with that? And Mr. Chairman, I would defer to Beth Blackwell if she has any other color on that. No? She's good.
So, Mr. Chairman, where I'm going with this is we just received, the Business Council, and there was 3 applications in there for gap funding that were all municipal water projects. That 2 and maybe all 3 of those may have been eligible for SRF, Clean Water Drinking Fund money. And so it still doesn't look to me like we're hitting the mark, that we have some entities that are going to the Business Council for funding municipal water projects and sewer projects that may very well be eligible for these federal 80-20 state dollars and some type of loan arrangement versus 100% grant through the business ready community. And now we're looking at gap funding. So I would like to see that individual get with the Business Council and look at those projects to see, rather than coming back to us and trying to fund that 100% with gap funding to the Business Council, whether those are eligible for funding under the Clean Water Program. And just as we go forward, I would encourage that individual in the office to coordinate with the Business Council when they receive these municipal water projects to divert them back to this entity and this program, because it is a little bit underutilized. And it's 80% federal money, and there is new guidelines as far as loan forgiveness. And so there's more of a grant component to it now that didn't exist before. So,
Mr. Chairman and Senator Hicks, that is one of our sort of goals that we've purposed internally at OSLI. Ms. Blackwell and her staff are trying to coordinate with DEQ, with Water Development and the Business Council, so that everybody's aware of what potential funding programs are out there and they can communicate and confer, particularly when these sorts of projects come along. I agree that the word doesn't get out very well with respect to available SRF funds. And unfortunately, with the new, I call it the new engineer program because it was new when I started a couple of years ago, there is a misconception that the engineer position is supposed to go out and engineer small community water systems. And so we fight with that too and say, no, that's not really the intention of the position, but your comments are well taken and we will step up our efforts in that regard.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Representative Larson.
So Beth, following up on that conversation, we've got a number of these BRC programs that have been funded, but now they're finding that the costs have exceeded due to everything else that's going on. Is there the potential that the shortfall funding that we're finding could be provided by one of the revolving funds?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson. There's several things that we would have to look at. The project would first have to be on the intended use plan for the SRF program, whichever one they would be. And it'd have to be an eligible project within the SRF programs. But absolutely, SRF can pretty much fund with just about anyone except some other federal funds. So, and we can do cradle to grave funding. I think a lot of times people don't come to SRF because in our world, loan is a 4-letter bad word. They'd much rather have a bunch of free money to do a project than pay them back.
Well, and Mr. Chairman and Beth, what we heard from the Business Council is that some of these infrastructure projects in the BRC are in communities that don't have a lot of resources. But the way I understand is you can structure that and have some options for them. And so I certainly agree. I think that this may be, Mr. Chairman, But I just wanted to clarify that we still could direct them that way and may be able to resolve that problem.
Yes, sir.
Well,
Thank you.
Just to follow up, the question is, can you look at these particular projects and let us know what can happen to them? And it's something that has to happen between now and when we address.
Next
request.
Monday. Representative Simpson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Scoggin, this priority number 7 request we're talking about right now is completely all about the Safety Drinking Water Act. It does not incorporate anything, any federal monies from the BIL monies you were anticipating. Is that correct?
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman. Okay, I'm sorry. Mr. Chairman, there's a mistake in the book. That's the Clean Water Act, not the Drinking Water Act. Drinking Water Act is for the Drinking Water SRF program. Clean Water Act should have been listed here for this program.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
so we have no BIL federal funds in this particular request? That's the infrastructure bill?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Simpson, the request we're speaking of is the state match for the federal funds.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Simpson, this request is for the anticipated increase to the clean water federal capitalization grants only. So I don't believe there are the funds that you are referencing.
Very good, thank you.
Thank you. Other questions? Dawn, quick question. The match is coming out of the corrective action fund from BEQ. So what's the source of the corrective action fund? Is that the LUST? Is that where the LUST money goes? Okay. All right, thank you.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, the next unit is 104. There
One-
are
one
no.
second,
Oh,
one
I'm sorry.
second, Director. Don, can you make a note, make sure we come back and talk about that, please? On the source of the funding out of that corrective action fund. Thank you. Go ahead. I'm sorry, Director, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, the next unit is 104, which is on page 55, the government grants and loans. There are no exception requests in that unit. And then the following unit, 105, is on page 61, which is the field services operations. There are no exceptions related to that unit. So then that brings us to unit 131, which is on page 69, which is the drinking water revolving fund. Our next exception is page 73, which is to increase the drinking water SRF program funds in the amount of $14,750,453. And this is, again, the reauthorization. This is the Safe Drinking Water Act. My apologies. The previous one was the Clean Water Act. It's expected to, again, double the federal appropriation to the program, thus doubling the state's allotment and required 20% match. The capitalization grants for the 23-24 biennial fiscal years are expected to be about 26.4 million. Our standard budget for 23-24 is 11.6 million, thus an additional $14,750,453 is required in order to take care of in order to take advantage of those funds as they become available. And again, the governor has recommended approval of this request.
So, Mr. Co-Chair, do we know with the increased government funding, is that a short-term remedy based upon situational or just administration, or is it, we anticipate that's going to continue, or is it, how long do they increase it for, do we know? 30 years.
Mr. Chairman, I would defer to Beth Blackwell on that question.
Mr. Chairman, the current funding levels were set within the bipartisan infrastructure bill where they reauthorized the two SRF programs. So it reauthorized those programs through 2026 at these higher levels. However, if if Congress doesn't pass a new budget and just passes a continuing resolution, we'll be funded at the old levels. And so this is just what Congress can fund these programs up to. And so they may not reauthorize the programs after 2026. Who knows what will happen after that point?
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
question, Ms. Blackwell. I thought the increase that we're seeing now of the federal funds actually come through the infrastructure bill, because I believe there was a big chunk of the water in the infrastructure bill was targeted for SRF and clean drinking water, or clean water funds. But what you're saying is that money would stay there because that's already been authorized for that increase. But if they don't do,
Unauthorized but not appropriated.
So within that infrastructure bill, they authorized the higher amounts for them to fund. However, for the past, I think, 3 years, they haven't passed a budget. They've done a continuing resolution.
thank you.
So if the continuing resolutions pass, we'll stay at normal levels.
All right, thank you. Mr. Chairman, one question for the director on here, and it comes to SLIB board sets the interest rate on the loan payments for these and currently set at 2.5% with some flexibility to make some adjustments, both federal guidelines, and I'm assuming that there might be hardship requirements in the loan forgiveness, but given the current federal fund rates is increasing and Fed's signaled that they're going to continue to increase, do you see sometime in the near future that the SLIB board will take up a discussion on not just this, but interest rates on all of our state loan programs that are operated out of your office and through SLIB?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Hicks, that's a very good question. I would anticipate that they will be looking to us to flag the current interest rates on all the grant loan program or all the loan programs to take a look at that. With respect to the SRF loans in general, as I mentioned in the opening, we have come up with this tiered interest, low interest tiered rate to continue to facilitate interest in the programs. And I believe that the board is excited by continuing with those interest rates because it's stimulating interest in the program. We have good sized pots of money there that, as Ms. Blackwell stated, folks don't want a loan. They want the grants, obviously, who wouldn't? But in those instances where we do have funds available and we aren't able to get them out the door, I would hope that the board would consider continuing with those low interest rates in order to keep stimulating the program going forward.
All right, thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, anything else? Continue.
Mr. Chairman, that brings us to our next unit, which is Unit 0166 on page 76, which is the Operations Forest Service MOU. There are no exceptions in that unit, which brings us then to Unit 0201 on page 80, which is the Forestry Division. And so I would yield the floor to State Forester Crapser to deal with our next exception.
Okay, Bill.
Mr. Chairman, our Unit 201, our General Forestry Operations, starts on page 81. Our first exception request would be on page 83. It's for hardware, software for the biennium. The director mentioned when she talked about the state land side that it was lower than anticipated because of rotations last biennium. Just the way they timed out, the forestry division's rotations are coming up. This biennium is why the higher number. It's for laptops and some tablets, along with our specialty software licensing that we use for timber inventory. This exception request was in consultation with ETS and the governor approved recommendation. Our next unit, Mr. Chairman, is 301, the emergency fire suppression account. As the committee is aware, the fire suppression account is the account that we hold to assist counties in fire costs for large fires and for fires that are outside of their capabilities. 22 of the 23 counties belong to the account. I'd also remind the committee that through the history of the account, about 90% of the money that is in the account has come from legislative appropriations, has not come from the county dues. So it's really not appropriate to call it an insurance account because it would be underwater most of the time if we were an insurance company. The legislature did put $20 million in the account in FY 13-14 and an additional $15 million in the account in 19-20. Our first exception request is on page 89. We're requesting a cash infusion into the account of $20 million. In the explanation of the request, Mr. Richards did send me some questions last week. I think he got a memo back out to all of you concerning the account. First thing, I made a mistake in the narrative where it says we only have $1.5 million going forward. That's more like 5 to 5.5 million. We did this request in June when I was still predicting gloom and doom for the entire summer for the fire season, which is why the number's like that. I think another thing that's important with the suppression account, if you look on Wolves right now, the balance is up and it shows a balance of around 13 million. The reason that balance is showed there, we work on estimated fire cost until we get the final bills from the federal government, which can take up to 2 or 3 years. So when I say there's $5 million left in the account, that's from our numbers, $5 million of uncommitted dollars. I've been very hesitant to encumber those dollars because we are still on estimates and we try to balance those out before we move the account forward.
So, Mr. Co-Chair, I guess you still have outstanding estimates for what we have not been billed for yet. Is that fair?
That's, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chair, that's correct. We have somewheres around $8 million of estimated costs that we have not been billed for yet.
And what are those for? What particular fires?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chair, I did provide Mr. Richards with a list of fires from 2020, outstanding fires. Most of our 2020 fires still have not been totally settled bills, all the bills settled up. We still have about $1 million to $1.5 million of older fires than that. Part of the problem, Mr. Co-Chair, is if we have a fire, and I'll use probably the best example I can use is the Britannia fire from 2018. Was almost all state and private land. It was about a $7 million fire, $7.5 million fire. We had resources from 37 different states in state helping us with the fire. The U.S. Forest Service works as the banker for everybody on interstate assignments. So we had a crew I know from Florida. A crew from Florida gets back, they prepare their bill, they send it to the Forest Service. Forest Service pays Florida. They don't forward the bill on to us till they've collected all the bills from the fire. So there was also crews from Alaska, there was crews from Pennsylvania, there was heavy air tankers, all that stuff. With the fire activity the Forest Service has had over the last 10 years, their system has quite honestly ground to a halt on preparing bills. On bills they receive, they've actually got better and we'll get to that in the next conversation. But it's a convoluted process, Mr. Co-Chairman. But we do work on estimated fire costs, sometimes as much as 4 years out.
So once you receive a bill, how long do you have to pay it?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chair, I don't believe we've ever tested that theory. We turn them around like we do all of our bills. We turn them around as efficiently as we can.
Do the bills, Mr. Co-Chair, have a time frame when they say pay within 90 days? Or pay within
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chair, as with everybody, ourselves included, that send bills out, they have, I think, 60 or 90 days on the federal bills. Mr. Chairman, I think statute's 45 days to pay bills. Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, for us paying bills, that's correct.
Just looking a way to make some money off the, anyway, that's all he's doing. That's why we like him. He's always thinking.
Mr. Chairman, the next exception request is in that same unit. It's on page 90. It is for spending authority in that account. Several bienniums ago, this committee asked us to start working on 10-year average when we asked for budget authority. Right now, our budget authority for expenditures is at $10 million in our standard budget for the biennium. This would increase it, and this is just based on the 10-year average of what our fire costs have been over those 10 years. The main reason for this is to try to prevent reoccurring B11s where we have to continue to try to B11 spending authority into the account if needed.
So, Mr. Co-Chair, just to follow up on that, you have spending authority for 10 million over the biennium. If you have a fire in the first year, you can come back to the legislature and we can authorize another 10 million for the next year. The question is, how many times have you had a $20 million year or plus? I think that's a more important question than 10-year average.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman, we've had, in the 18 years I've been here, we've probably exceeded our expending authority on this account, or been bumping up against it and had to ask for a B11 on this account 3 or 4 times. But we have increased it for a while, Mr. Co-Chair. We had the spending authority was down, I think, like 600,000.
But no, the question is, how often have you had a $20 million year? Not a biennium, $20 million a year in fire costs.
Mr. Chairman, in the last 10 years, we've exceeded 20 million, I believe only 1 year.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, the next unit is 401, our fire unit. It starts on page 95.
One other question. This is for Kevin. Kevin, do any of the ARPA dollars qualify for covering fire damage?
Chairman, I'm not aware of any. I'll add that to our inquiries. Naturally, the revenue assistance.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
just have a question. In the office of, in agency 1, the office of the governor, don't we have a $20 million contingency there, which I thought was for fire?
Well, that's what's in the, that's the recommendation. There's also a $20 million, he's also got a $20 million economic emergency fund.
Mr. Chairman, that's the public emergency fund
Public
contingency. And it is $20 million, but $10 million a year. So if you spent the $10 million in the first year, then you could go into the next year for an additional $10 million. And that's for all public health emergency.
Yeah, and just Don, just to follow up on that, Mr. Co-Chair, what we've done in the past is we said you have access to both. We don't have to have both at 2020. Obviously, I think the governor's office has asked for it. My recollection is it says because you have access to both of those, then you don't necessarily need the 2020. We just go by what was depleted. Is that accurate or is that not?
Mr. Chairman, I don't believe so. And the reason being is that $20 million in the governor's office contingency, public emergency contingency is new. So that was just adopted last year. So this is kind of the first opportunity where you have the potential to come out of different funds.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Mr. Vice President.
Question, Bill. So what is the most expensive year that the state of Wyoming has incurred? And do you know what some of our neighboring states in the last decade, what their most expensive? I'm just trying to get a feeling of the worst case scenario as potential expenditures for ours, but then how are we stack up with some of our neighboring states?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Hicks, our largest year, the biggest fire year we ever had cost-wise was 2012. State cost on that, some of it came out of EFSA, some of it came out of governor's other funds coming from other agencies, was about $40 million. We didn't include that in our 10-year average just because it was an outlier. But other states have had, Montana last year, state cost on wildfires in Montana last year was about 120 million. Colorado just 2 weeks ago spent several million. I haven't seen the final numbers yet on that. So it's, that's been our biggest. We've been pretty fortunate as far as the breakdown on large fires between federal land and state land. We've tried to be very ruthless with our federal partners as far as cost share agreements and that sort of thing. So that's been our biggest year. We've had a couple years since I've been doing this job where we haven't had any large fires, and the EFSA draw has been zero, but that's becoming less and less.
All right, thank you.
Before I leave the emergency fire suppression account, Mr. Co-Chair, to kind of answer one of your questions a little better, the last couple times we've asked for cash or cash infusions have been put into this account was the 13-14 cash infusion came from a budget footnote from a member of the legislature. The 19-20 cash infusion came from a governor's letter. We were asked by the budget office this time to do it as an exception request to put it up front where we thought the account was going to be.
Mr. Kosher, well, but what if we ask for a letter? That's just a joke.
Mr. Chairman, moving on to the next unit, 401, which is our.
If I may, question for Dawn on the fire suppression account. Where are those funds sit as far as investment? Are they in the state agency pool or where are they at?
Mr. Chairman, Senator, yes, they're in the state agency pool.
And remind me, Mr. Chairman, if you would, Dawn, you know, what kind of returns do we make on the state agency pool?
Mr. Chairman, I believe the state treasurer's office is hoping for the mid to high 1% range.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Hicks, just to give you a picture of the interest that that account has been able to make in the history of the account since 1987, county dues, not counting last year, excuse me, through 2020, county dues were 7.6 million and interest made on the account was 7.3 million. So interest made on the account is almost equal to the dues that have been paid for the account.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, for the third time's the charm, we'll move to unit 401. Our fire unit.
Twice? Move the unit 401.
Our first exception request in the fire units on page 95. It's for funding to continue our seats or our single engine air tanker program for the biennium. It's a request for $1.1 million. The last 2 years, we've been able to fund the 2 single engine air tankers based out of Casper. It's been an incredibly successful program. They're used to support county efforts to keep fires small, put them out quick. As I stated in my opening remarks, the Pine Haven fire in the town of Pine Haven was a great example from this year where they had a fire, they lost one house. All accounts of the fire people on the ground, they probably would have lost most of the town, but we were able to get the single engine air tankers there quickly along with our Helitac helicopter and help them keep the fire contained north of town. So that's what that exception request is. The next exception request in our fire unit is on page 96. That's for $171,000 to an increase of $171,000 for our helicopter contract. The legislature did approve this last biennium as a one-time funding. The governor's recommended it again as a one-time funding. The advantage of the need for this is one, our helicopter contract for the contractor numbers, the amount we've had budgeted for that has not gone up in over 12 years. And of course, fuel, everything else has gone up substantially. The other thing we've been able to do, or were able to do last biennium with that extra dollars, is we were able to have a substantially more higher performance helicopter available. The best way to describe it is the helicopter we used before had a 120-gallon bucket was the maximum amount of water it could hold. This ship that we've had is the maximum the water it can hold is 220 gallons. And that type of gallonage for fires doesn't sound like a lot, but on small initial attack fires, the 100-gallon difference in a bucket makes a big difference. Mr. Chairman, that's all the exception request in our fire budget. The next unit is Unit 501, which is our forest performance account. This unit was put in, or this budget request, the exception request is on page 103. This was put in to clean up a reoccurring B11 issue. Statutorily, we collect performance bonds and slash deposits when we sell timber sales. 99 times out of 100, those monies are returned to the contractor at the completion of the sale. One time out of 100, we have to use those dollars for cleanup. We've never really had this as a budget item, so when we've had to use money out of this account before, we've had to B11 the authority. So this is to administratively clean up a budget B11 issue, and Kevin could probably have more information on why he's asking everybody to do that. Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Representative Larson.
So Kevin, maybe you can help me on this, because we've actually got three of these accounts: this forestry performance account, then we have the ranch A account, and the farm loan reserve, all coming up that we'll talk about. Statutory, it says that they have the funds in these are to be continuously appropriated. And so then I'm confused as why then we need to do an exception request. How does that all work?
Mr. Chairman, you're correct. Continuously appropriated means that we can B11 these funds when it's necessary. The whole exercise that we've had with all the agencies with the B11 cleanup, or the repeated B11s, is more transparency related and also efficiency related. It's quite a bit less expensive to go through the appropriations process and stand this up than it is to author and manage a B11 through the process. So transparency and also efficiency would be the key.
Okay, just a different way to get to where we're going. So thank you, Kevin, appreciate that.
Okay, thank you. Continue.
Mr. Chairman, our next unit is, I will bounce back to the director.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Representative Walters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before we leave forestry, my question is about the timber and timber sales and federal timber sales up in the northeast corner of the state, and the federal desire to maybe shut some of those down, which would shut down some of our large timbering organizations or companies and forestry product companies in that part of the state. What is your office doing? What have you done? What can we do to help your office push back against the federal side to make sure that those forest sales are still available and keep those businesses up and running in that northeast corner of the state?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Walters, I think I've been working very close with the governor's office on the Black Hills and what we can do on that. Really, the answer to your question lies in a unit that will bounce back to forestry in a very short period of time as we go through the book, if that's okay. Okay.
Okay, thank you. Continue, Director.
Turn on my mic. Mr. Chairman, the next unit 0601 on page 107. deals with our Ranch A account. The next exception request is found on page 109, which is another one of these elimination of the reoccurring B11. I would yield to Deputy Director Crowder to explain the Ranch A account.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Ranch A account was established in 2018 by the legislature to help the Ranch A Foundation do maintenance and repairs to the historic buildings on the property. They provided seed money of $100,000 at that time, and also directed that any funds received by us in the leasing of that property be deposited into that account for further use for the maintenance and improvement of those buildings. Currently, that account has a balance of $47,546 that is available for that use. As the director mentioned, this is just a request for spending authority in that account to eliminate the reoccurring B11s. The spending authority we requested is $16,000, and that's based off of the average annual income that we realize off that property through leasing. Again, the governor has recommended approval of this exception. I'm happy to answer any questions.
All right, thank you. Continue. Oh, go ahead, Senator Grew.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm just reading. Positive all earnings, how much have we earned on that piece of property?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Guru, that's a great question, and it depends on what point in time you're asking about. So there was some deed restrictions associated with that property that restricted our ability to lease it, the Ranch A and the foundation's ability to use it. They were successful in going through to Congress and reducing and eliminating those deed restrictions and getting a piece of property donated to the state that was underneath one of the buildings, so that we were unrestricted at that time in leasing. So we currently have one special use lease to the foundation, and they're able to lease for weddings, lease apartment buildings out, and just general use of the property. We have a couple small permits for grazing as people trail through there. But on average, we make about $8,000 per year from the property.
Okay, thank you. All right, continue.
Mr. Chairman, the next units 0902, which is mineral royalty grants, 0201 federal forestry grants, and 5001 fire protection revolving account, county equipment. There are no exception requests in those units. Not sure if anybody has any questions related to that. And if not, then I would yield to State Forester Crapser for the next exception request.
Great, we've been waiting with anticipation for this part of the presentation, apparently. So, go ahead, Bill.
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman, now I'm lost. In 5001, I would point out the federal forestry grants that the director just mentioned, the spending authority in there to accept those any federal forest grants does not include any additional dollars that we may get through the infrastructure bill, because that's still very unclear where that will be at this time. The next exception request we have, Mr. Chairman, is on page 129. It has to do with our fire revolving account. It's again a budget authority, a spending authority exception request to increase our spending authority in that account by $4 million of biennium. 2 general sessions ago, I believe it was, the legislature approved expansion of the revolving account. Several of you that were on the committee at the time will recall the discussion that when counties send resources out of state, they had to go through the billing process of billing the federal government. Took months and months for them to get paid. The purpose of this account was so we could pay the counties and then bill the Forest Service. The objective of it was to get more county folks involved in fire and support other states more in fire, because we get a lot of support from those states. The program has been wildly successful. This last year, we had over 400 county firefighters that went on out-of-state assignments, have increased a lot of qualifications, red cards, experience for addressing fires in our state, plus being able to support other states. So this is to increase the budget authority. Right now, we've had to do several B11s this year because it was such a big fire year nationally. The revolving account has worked. The other thing that has worked really good, counties, when they were individually paying the Forest Service or billing the Forest Service, it was taking 7 months to a year for them to get paid. By us batch billing the Forest Service with numerous bills all put together, and because it's a state billing them instead of counties, they're turning those bills around in 2 to 4 months, which is pretty good for the Forest Service. So that's what this exception request is.
So we pay 45 days, they pay 7 or 6 months.
Good work.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
So Bill, my memory is that because of that, before we had the revolving account, because of the length of getting reimbursed for that, we just had qualified fire people that just says we can't afford to go help our neighbors anyplace else or even in the state at times because we're just not getting paid. And that has loosened that up and give them that stability to where they can afford to go out and do that. Is that accurate? That's Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, that's correct. We've had a lot more counties that wanted to be involved. We've actually had some counties that never really even had red carded people before that have been able to put an engine crew together and have them available. And especially on the shoulder seasons, or if we're having a big fire season, it's really long-term has increased our capacity greatly.
Thank you. Mike, continue.
The next unit is 6001. It starts on page 133. It's the Good Neighbor Authority revolving. It's another account that you all set up 2 general sessions ago. Representative Walters, this kind of addresses what we're trying to do on federal land. At the time, the legislature approved 5 positions, 1 FTE, 4 AWAC positions under the rules that we had to have federal money to fund those positions. Right now, we've been able to fill 2 of those positions with federal funding, a forester on the Black Hills and a forester on the Bighorn National Forest. Last year, our forester on the Black Hills, our AWAC, Good Neighbor Forester, actually sold more timber on the Bear Lodge district of the Black Hills National Forest than the Forest Service sold on the Bear Lodge district of the Black Hills National Forest. So it's been a great tool for one, leveraging our resources, leveraging the federal resources, and it also helps us put pressure on the feds to keep moving in the right direction. This is another one of the B11 fixes. We didn't have a budget lined out for this. This is, we've done all of this after the authorization through B11s, and this is to put the budget, so it is codified, if you will, in the budget.
Go ahead, Representative Larson.
Thank you. But Bill, to follow up a little more in detail, that's kind of a partial fix to the problem that Representative Walters has outlined. And you'll recall in this Federal Natural Resource Committee, we worked with you and worked with the governor's office and had all of the area U.S. Forest Service offices in evaluating the process to determine allowable timber cuts in the Black Hills Forest. And there was some disagreement on the numbers, your numbers, the working group numbers seemed to align. They did not align with the Forest Service, and we brought that up to them and asked for some, and they had not included the work group in the as they should. And so we had challenged them to go back and look at that and readjust their numbers, and they were reducing timber sales currently based on what they anticipated the future would be, or before they had changed the RFP, or not the RFP, but the ASQ. Yeah, the ASU. And so have we seen any relaxation from that? Have they come back and made any adjustment to that? Because it really is a big deal for our timber producers. Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, we have seen some movement. Unfortunately, the movement's in the wrong direction with what they're looking at. I believe, and I don't want to put Erica on the spot, but I believe the governor's office may be addressing some of the needs for looking at the Black Hills here later in the week with you all. We are working with South Dakota really close on the Forest Service challenged both states to show us the wood if you think the wood's there. So we are working with South Dakota on a LiDAR, air photo, ground truth analysis of where the wood is and what some other potentials are. But it is, quite frankly, it is a mess up there. A lot of disagreement as far as where things ought to be. The Good Neighbor projects that we've been doing have been something we've been able to do to actually put a little bit more wood on the market and push them as hard as we can push them administratively to move forward.
Okay,
Mr. Chairman,
yes, go ahead.
just to answer Director Kapser's question, is we are looking at a governor's letter that we will bring you that has to deal with FNRPA funds and some of the Black Hills. So that'll be something that we'll discuss with you on Friday.
Okay, thank you. Anything else? All right, continue.
Mr. Chairman, the next unit 6801 is on page 141. That's the Transportation Enterprise Fund. There are no exception requests related to this unit. So that brings us to unit 9901 on page 145 with our final exception request found on page 148, which is a farm loan loss preserve budget authority to eliminate the recurring B11, the amount of $5 million. Wyoming statute 11-34-202E directs that if at the end of the fiscal year, the amount accumulated in the loss reserve account exceeds 5% of the total amount of permanent funds of the state invested in farm and or water development project loans, the amount in excess of the 5% must be transferred to the general fund. Prior to the 2023-2024 biennium budget request, the budget authority to make the request to transfer was requested through the B11. In order to eliminate the recurring B11 process, OSLI was asked to utilize the exception budget process for this biennium and future bienniums, and the governor has recommended approval of this exception request.
Right, thank you. Go ahead, Representative Larson.
Director, I apologize, but could I ask you to go back to page 144?
Certainly.
And on this farm loan reserve down there, in the total by object series, we have the sources of funding. And on the non-expendable trust, we have that coded as N. And we're wondering if that shouldn't be special revenue.
Mr. Chairman, that's correct. SR.
So, Mr. Chairman, could we maybe, I think Don needs our blessing to give him direction to make that correction. Is that right, Don?
Here, and I think in one other place as well.
Yeah.
So let it be written.
Let it be written. Okay. Thank you.
So, Mr. Co-Chair, I was just wondering if there are ways that we can make more B11s just to make Kevin's life a little bit more fun.
Mr. Chairman, honestly, we've heard you loud and clear about the number of B11s. And we had some statutory changes in the budget actually about thresholds for B11s. So what we're trying to do is everything we can to limit the number of B11s and create this transparency.
We're getting there.
We're getting there.
Good
Okay,
job. Good
thank
job.
you. Continue.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That brings us to the end of Office of State Lands and Investments budget. So if there are any other questions, we would stand for those at this time.
All right, thank you. Other questions of any nature or anything that you want to go back and circle back to? All right,
Mr.
Director.
Mr. Chair.
I do have a question.
Yes, we do have. We got two. Representative Smith, and we'll come to you, Mr. Co-Chair.
Well, I don't know if this is the appropriate time, but I noticed in the governor's ARPA request, there's $50 million that goes to the Office of State Lands and Investments to do something with, and just wanted to get your thoughts about that.
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Stith, I assume that you're talking about the proposed sort of ARPA program, the 50 million. And we've talked with governor's staff, and I don't know all of the details of what's envisioned with that program, but We certainly are ready, willing, and able to help. Our expertise mainly lies obviously in water and sewer infrastructure related activities based on the SRF programs. But if there's anything else we can do, also our experience getting out the CARES Act funding and that sort of thing, we know how to hit the ground running and get those funds out. So we're happy to pitch in and help in any way.
Okay, thank you.
Well, I want to follow up on the governor's ARPA request for housing, affordable housing, and how that ties into, or if it does, to your housing, affordable housing discussions that we had earlier. I think it's a $20 million request. Is that right, Don? Yeah.
Yeah.
And Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chair, I think that spurred some of the conversations that we're having with municipalities across the state, that they may have funding available, but may not have lands that could be deployed on. They're looking at landowners around those cities, and we happen to be one of them, which has pulled us into the conversation. So I don't think there's a direct tie, but maybe an ancillary.
Yeah, but you don't need money to do that.
No.
You're going to make money to do that.
So how, Mr. Chairman, how does that work? Jason, is that a public-private thing, or how can you just give me an example of how that would work?
Mr. Chairman, I don't know if I can give you an example right now because we're still ironing it out. And in fact, we had one of our very first meetings with the city of Cheyenne yesterday to start that ironing process. And what we are really describing is what are the needs of the city and what are the things that the state land office can do to help that, and where are the statutory or rule changes that are needed to help facilitate that type of discussion. So we're still in that ironing process.
So as you talk about the various lands that might be available, I mean, how do you deal with that when so many of the trust lands over which you have, and I'm assuming a lot of these trust lands that are involved are going to be school trust lands, which, so how just as a general discussion, because we're kind of interested in trying to figure out how this might work on the affordable housing. How does the state discharge its obligations, fiduciary obligation to raise money for schools, but then potentially this land ends up being used for more affordable housing? How do you see the ability of your office or we as the state of Wyoming to balance those two separate requirements?
Absolutely. Mr. Chairman, it all comes down to an analysis of the project specific that would be in front of us. So each town has a different need and each property exhibits different attributes. And we need to look into those. And currently, as the director stated, we don't share or retain ownership through development. So we sell the land to a developer and they develop it. And then through that, we don't necessarily sell it outright. We exchange into something that's further down the development road and wait for the developers to catch up to us and just keep doing it in that manner. And at that point, all we're doing is increasing the value of the land that we have under ownership, but still realizing the same grazing revenue off of it, the same ancillary oil and gas revenue, but none of the development revenue.
So are you proactive when you do that? You say, all right, we do this, but maybe looking for a contingent parcel or something like that. You're looking for something that to leverage your advantage, the state when you go to that type of an exchange.
Mr. Chairman, a great example is just south of town here, adjacent to the Laramie County Community College. We had some isolated trust parcels up on the ridge there that weren't accessible for any reason, but we understood that development was approaching that area, and then developer approached us and we expressed the need to do an exchange and to ride that appreciation curve going out. So we disposed of those lands, those isolated lands up on the ridgetop, and acquired lands up on the Chalk Bluff County Road, which is a little bit further south, but in the development progress route, I guess, so that sometime in the future we would have those lands available for.
So you see that then as trading land with basically a relatively the same highest and best use, and trying to and I'm assuming you're doing appraisals, so you're getting roughly equivalent values.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And Mr. Chairman, to further that thought, a highest and best use may not always be affordable housing, but we don't know what the developers are coming up with. And like I mentioned, we're only realizing the grazing revenue mostly off of those parcels. So any development that we can participate in will be a net increase to our revenue stream. And that's what we're looking at.
Thank you. President Schwartz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So following that train of thought, have you looked into a long-term 75-year lease with a developer to get housing?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Schwartz, we've discussed it internally, and we've had some interest from other legislators approach us about that possibility. We haven't really pursued that so far because we do have statutory limits that don't allow us to participate. The most important limit is that anybody who develops an improvement on state trust land is only allowed to be reimbursed or recompensated the contributory value of that improvement, not the replacement value and not the market value. So that really stops any developers who would want to do any project on us. Without that kind of legislative cleanup, we can't take the next step to see what the possibilities are. And therefore, we're kind of stuck with riding the appreciation wave and letting developers come to us.
Jason, do you want to craft a bill that we can fix that?
Mr. Chairman, we do have some notes we can share. Yes.
Okay. Anything else? Anything else for our friends at OSLI? Thank you. Thank you very much. Very good.
Thank you very much.
Very good. All right. Mr. Co-Chair, anything?
No.
All right, well, so it looks like we're still on schedule, so we'll go ahead and we'll recess for lunch until 1 p.m. Anything, Don, before we go, anything, Elizabeth?
Mr. Chairman, you have one agency this afternoon, Agency 80,
Right.
Department of Corrections.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll stand in recess until 1 o'clock.